Welcome, gentle blade bearer, to the sacred art of breathing that transforms ordinary human limitation into supernatural mastery. Tonight, we explore the profound techniques that flow like rivers from the primordial source of all demon slayer power, each style a unique expression of the human spirit's infinite capacity for adaptation and growth. These are not mere combat forms, but spiritual practices that connect breath to soul, movement to meaning, and individual weakness to collective strength. So settle beneath your covers like morning mist gathering in mountain valleys, and let the rhythm of total concentration breathing carry you into peaceful slumber as we traverse every sacred technique that has ever graced a demon slayer's blade. In the beginning, there was breath, and from that first conscious drawing of air into mortal lungs came the power that would forever change the balance between human fragility and demonic dominance. The sun-breathing style stands alone among all combat techniques as the primordial source from which every other breathing method emerged, its origins lost in legends that speak of a swordsman whose mastery transcended the boundaries between mortal ability and divine intervention, whose very existence seemed to challenge the fundamental laws that governed what human beings could achieve through dedication, training, and an understanding of breath that approached the sacred. Yoriichi Tsugikuni moved through the world like a manifestation of solar power given human form, his presence so profound that even demons who had existed for centuries found themselves unable to comprehend the depths of ability that he displayed with casual effortlessness that made impossible achievements appear as natural as sunrise itself. The sun breathing that flowed through his movements represented perfect harmony between technique and spirit, a unity of purpose that eliminated the gap between intention and execution, while creating combat effectiveness that seemed to operate according to different physical laws than those governing ordinary swordsmanship. The 12 original forms of sun breathing that Yoriichi created embodied principles that transcended simple martial technique to encompass philosophical understanding of how human potential could be maximized through proper relationship with the fundamental forces that sustained life itself. Each form represented not merely a different way of moving blade through space, but a complete approach to existing within combat situations that demanded integration of breath, movement, spiritual focus, and tactical awareness into seamless expressions of perfection that left no opening for failure or hesitation. The first form, dance, established foundation movements that connected the practitioner to flowing rhythms that mimicked the sun's eternal journey across heavens, creating circular patterns that generated power through continuous motion, rather than discrete strikes that began and ended according to conventional timing. The graceful arcs that characterized this form disguised devastating effectiveness within movements that appeared almost ceremonial in their measured beauty, teaching fundamental truth that deadly precision need not abandon aesthetic harmony when both served the greater purpose of protecting innocent life. The second form, clear blue sky, embodied the concept of perfect clarity that came from eliminating all unnecessary elements from combat thinking, reducing complex tactical situations to essential interactions between blade and target, while maintaining awareness that enabled appropriate response to changing conditions without losing focus on primary objectives. The vertical strikes that defined this technique carried the weight of absolute commitment, each movement representing decision to act decisively, rather than allowing doubt or hesitation to compromise effectiveness when lives depended on immediate resolution. The third form, Raging Sun, channeled the fierce protective energy that drove warriors to exceed normal limitations when defending those who could not defend themselves, transforming righteous anger into controlled fury. that enhanced rather than compromised tactical judgment while providing emotional strength necessary for facing opponents whose power might otherwise prove overwhelming. The horizontal, sweeping motions that characterized this form created zones of absolute denial that no demon could penetrate without accepting destruction, establishing defensive perimeters that expanded protection beyond individual combat to encompass broader areas where civilians might shelter. The fourth form, Burning Bones Summer Sun, addressed the psychological challenges involved in maintaining combat effectiveness during extended engagements where normal human endurance would prove inadequate for achieving victory against enemies whose supernatural stamina created advantages that could only be overcome through accessing reserves of strength that existed beyond ordinary physical capacity. The spiraling attacks that defined this technique enabled sustained offensive pressure while conserving energy through efficient movement patterns that maximized impact while minimizing expenditure of resources that might be needed for extended combat duration. The fifth form, Setting Sun Transformation, embodied adaptability that enabled practitioners to modify their approach according to changing battlefield conditions while maintaining essential characteristics that made sun breathing uniquely effective against demonic opponents whose abilities could neutralize techniques that relied on predictable patterns or rigid adherence to predetermined attack sequences. The flowing transitions that connected different striking angles within this form demonstrated how flexibility could enhance rather than compromise precision when properly understood and systematically applied. The sixth form, Solar Heat Haze, utilized deceptive movement patterns that created visual confusion while maintaining perfect accuracy in strike placement, teaching an essential lesson that misdirection could serve defensive purposes without compromising offensive capability. When employed by practitioners who understood how perception could be manipulated without sacrificing substantial effectiveness, the shimmering quality that accompanied execution of this form reflected advanced understanding of how environmental factors could be incorporated into combat technique to create advantages that supplemented raw skill with tactical intelligence. The seventh form, Beneficent Radiance, represented the philosophical peak of sun-breathing philosophy through techniques that embodied compassionate strength rather than mere dominance, creating combat approaches that sought to minimize unnecessary suffering while achieving decisive resolution of conflicts that threatened innocent people. The wide-ranging strikes that characterized this form provided comprehensive protection while demonstrating how individual mastery could extend benefits to entire communities when properly directed towards serving others rather than glorifying personal achievement. The eighth form, Sunflower Thrust, concentrated all available power into single focused attacks that could penetrate any defense while maintaining spiritual foundation that prevented such devastating capability from becoming corrupted by pride or cruelty that might transform protective technique into instrument of oppression. The straightforward nature of this form's execution concealed sophisticated understanding of how maximum effectiveness could be achieved through perfect unity of physical technique, mental focus, and moral purpose that aligned individual action with universal principles. The ninth form, Dragon Sun Haze Head Dance, combined multiple previous techniques into complex sequences that addressed tactical situations requiring simultaneous attention to offense, defense, and environmental awareness, while maintaining flowing continuity that prevented opponents from identifying discrete moments of vulnerability that might be exploited during transitions between different combat approaches. The serpentine movements that defined this form demonstrated how apparent complexity could emerge from perfect understanding of simple principles when mastery enabled seamless integration of multiple technical elements. The 10th form, Fire Wheel, created rotating patterns of destruction that established complete dominance over spherical areas, while teaching practitioners how sustained technique application could transform individual strikes into continuous zones of threat that made to approach impossible for enemies who relied on conventional movement patterns to achieve strategic positioning. The circular nature of these attacks reflected deeper understanding of how combat technique could mirror natural phenomena while serving practical purposes that protected human life through methods that demons found impossible to counter effectively. The 11th form, Fake Rainbow, represented ultimate expression of misdirection, integrated with lethal precision, creating attack patterns that appeared to strike from impossible angles while maintaining absolute accuracy in targeting vital points that would ensure immediate elimination of threats regardless of their apparent strength or defensive capabilities. The rainbow-like afterimages that accompanied execution of this technique demonstrated how perfect speed could create visual phenomena that served both practical and aesthetic purposes without compromising fundamental effectiveness. The 12th form, Flame Dance, embodied the culmination of all previous training in flowing sequences that connected every sun-breathing principle into continuous expressions of mastery that could be maintained indefinitely when practitioner had achieved complete integration of breath, movement, and spiritual purpose into unified approach to combat that transcended individual technique to become complete way of existing within dangerous situations while maintaining essential humanity. The legendary 13th form remained Yoriichi's ultimate secret, a technique so profound that its very existence challenged understanding of what individual human achievement could accomplish when dedication transcended normal limitations to approach realms that seemed more appropriate for divine intervention than mortal effort. This final form represented not merely another combat technique, but complete reorganization of how sun-breathing principles could be applied to address the specific challenge presented by Muzan Kibutsuji's unique physiology and Balameiko regeneration capabilities. The 13th form operated according to principles that connected all 12 previous forms into continuous flowing sequence that could be maintained indefinitely while adapting to changing tactical requirements without losing essential characteristics that made each individual technique effective against demonic opponents. The repetitive nature of this ultimate expression enabled practitioners to achieve sustained effectiveness that exceeded what discrete technique application could provide, while reducing fatigue through efficient movement patterns that conserved energy during extended combat engagement. The strategic purpose that drove development of the 13th form reflected Yoriichi's understanding that Muzan's ability to relocate his vital organs throughout his body created tactical situation where conventional elimination approaches would prove inadequate without systematic method for addressing multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining continuous pressure that prevented regeneration from negating accumulated damage. The 12 hearts and 7 brains that sustained the demon progenitor's existence required coordinated assault that could track and eliminate mobile targets while preventing escape or counterattack. The Kamado family's preservation of sun-breathing through their sacred Hinokami Kagura represented one of history's most remarkable examples of cultural transmission, maintaining essential knowledge through generations of practitioners who understood the spiritual significance of their inherited responsibility without comprehending its practical applications in supernatural warfare. The dance that Tanjiro performed each new year carried within its ceremonial movements the complete technical foundation that would eventually enable his son to access power that had remained dormant for centuries. The ritual nature of Hinokami Kagura created educational environment where technical mastery could be developed through repetitive practice that appeared to serve purely religious purposes while actually maintaining muscle memory and breath control patterns that would prove essential when combat applications became necessary. The sacred context that surrounded these activities provided psychological framework that connected individual technique to broader purposes that transcended personal achievement, to encompass protection of family, community, and traditional values that gave meaning to technical excellence. The earrings that accompanied transmission of Hinokami Kagura served as physical symbols of continuity that connected each generation to ancestral knowledge, while providing visual reminder of responsibilities that came with inheriting techniques whose power could influence outcomes of conflicts that determined survival of innocent people. The Hanafuda design that decorated these traditional ornaments carried cultural significance that reinforced understanding of how individual mastery served collective welfare rather than purely selfish interests. Tanjiro's awakening to his inherited capabilities represented profound transformation that connected personal tragedy to ancestral strength, while demonstrating how desperate circumstances could trigger access to abilities that had remained latent throughout years of normal existence. The moment when water breathing proved inadequate against Rui's overwhelming power created necessity that opened pathways to deeper knowledge that his conscious mind had never recognized, but his body remembered through genetic inheritance and cultural practice. The physical demands that accompanied Tanjiro's transition from water breathing to sun breathing reflected the reality that accessing such profound power required physiological capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations, creating strain that threatened to destroy his body even as it provided strength necessary for protecting those he loved most. The bleeding and exhaustion that followed early attempts to utilize Hinokami Kagura demonstrated how power came with costs that made its use sustainable only when absolutely necessary for achieving objectives that justified accepting such physical punishment. The spiritual dimensions of sun breathing that Tanjiro gradually discovered went beyond simple combat technique to encompass complete philosophy of existence that integrated physical capability with moral purpose in ways that prevented corruption of power through selfish application, while ensuring that strength served protection of others rather than personal aggrandizement. The dreams and visions that accompanied his developing mastery provided guidance that connected him to ancestral wisdom while maintaining individual agency that allowed personal growth within traditional framework. The evolution of Tanjiro's understanding of sun breathing reflected gradual integration of intellectual knowledge with intuitive wisdom that came through practical application under circumstances where theoretical learning proved inadequate for addressing immediate threats that required innovative adaptation of inherited techniques to unprecedented tactical situations. The development of personal variations within traditional forms demonstrated how authentic mastery enabled creative expression that honored essential principles while addressing individual circumstances that ancestral teachers could never have anticipated. The emotional significance that sun breathing held for Tanjiro transcended its practical utility as combat technique to encompass connection to family heritage that provided meaning and purpose during periods of doubt and despair, when the full weight of his responsibilities threatened to overwhelm his determination to continue fighting against seemingly impossible odds. The knowledge that each form he mastered honored his father's memory while serving his sister's welfare, created psychological foundation that sustained him through training and combat experiences that might have broken practitioners whose motivation remained purely personal. The recognition that sun breathing represented not merely superior combat technique, but complete approach to living that integrated physical capability with spiritual development, created framework for personal growth that extended beyond Demon Slayer operations toward broader understanding of how individual excellence could serve universal principles that transcended immediate tactical requirements. The breathing patterns that sustained combat effectiveness also provided foundation for meditation and self-cultivation that enhanced all aspects of human potential rather than simply improving fighting ability. The legacy that sun breathing would carry forward through Tanjiro's mastery represented renewal of ancient wisdom that had nearly been lost during centuries when its practical applications seemed unnecessary for ordinary human existence, yet whose underlying principles remained relevant for anyone seeking to maximize their potential through disciplined practice that connected individual effort to transcendent purposes. The techniques that had been preserved through ceremonial dance would continue to evolve through practical application, while maintaining essential characteristics that made them uniquely effective against supernatural threats. The mystery that continued to surround complete mastery of sun breathing reflected its nature as technique that demanded integration of physical, mental, and spiritual development to degrees that few practitioners could achieve regardless of their dedication or natural talent, creating standard of excellence that served as perpetual inspiration for continued growth rather than achievable goal that might lead to complacency or spiritual pride that could corrupt its essential nature. The foundation styles that emerged from sun breathing's primordial perfection represent humanity's collective wisdom in adapting transcendent technique to individual limitations and strengths, each breathing method reflecting unique approach to channeling supernatural power through human vessels whose capabilities varied according to natural gifts, personal experience, and spiritual development that could be cultivated through dedicated practice under proper guidance. These 5 fundamental techniques became pillars upon which Demon Slayer operations would rest for generations, their effectiveness proven through countless battles, where ordinary people transformed themselves into warriors capable of standing against supernatural evil that threatened to consume everything precious about human civilization. Water breathing flowed into existence through Sakonji Urokodaki's profound understanding of adaptation and flexibility as essential principles for survival in combat situations where rigid adherence to predetermined patterns could prove fatal when facing opponents whose abilities exceeded normal parameters for supernatural confrontation. The former Water Hashira's teaching methods reflected deep wisdom about how individual students required different approaches to achieve mastery. His patient instruction, creating educational environment where technical excellence emerged through understanding rather than mere repetition of forms, whose underlying principles remained mysterious to practitioners who learned movements without comprehending their essential nature. The mountain springs that surrounded Sakonji's training ground provided perfect metaphor for water-breathing philosophy, their constant flow demonstrating how persistence could overcome any obstacle through patient application of gentle pressure that never ceased, never wavered, and never accepted defeat, despite encountering barriers that seemed insurmountable to observers who lacked understanding of how time and consistency could achieve results that dramatic gestures failed to produce. The sound of flowing water became soundtrack for education that transformed mountain boys into demon slayers whose capabilities exceeded anything their humble origins might have suggested possible. Tanjiro's introduction to water breathing began with fundamental breathing exercises that seemed deceptively simple yet required complete restructuring of how he understood the relationship between conscious will and bodily function, forcing him to develop awareness of autonomic processes that most people never considered, while learning to direct them with precision that enhanced every aspect of physical performance. The total concentration breathing that formed foundation of all advanced technique demanded mental discipline that connected breath control to emotional regulation, while providing access to strength that exceeded normal human limitations. Through proper application of ancient knowledge, the 10 traditional forms of water breathing that Tanjiro mastered during his foundational training each addressed specific tactical situations, while teaching broader principles about how flowing movement could overcome rigid opposition through techniques that prioritized efficiency over raw power, while maintaining deadly effectiveness against opponents whose strength might seem overwhelming to practitioners who relied on brute force approaches to combat resolution. Each form built upon previous knowledge while introducing new concepts that expanded understanding of how water-like adaptability could be weaponized without sacrificing essential gentleness that distinguished protective technique from mere destruction. The first form, Water Surface Slash, established basic principles of flowing attack that generated power through proper body mechanics rather than muscular tension, teaching essential lesson that effectiveness came from harmony between movement and intention, rather than forceful application of strength that created resistance and wasted energy during extended combat engagement. The horizontal cutting motion that characterized this technique provided foundation for understanding how blade movement could be integrated with footwork and breath control to create seamless expressions of deadly grace that appeared effortless despite their devastating precision. The philosophy that guided water breathing instruction emphasized understanding over memorization, requiring students to comprehend why specific movements produce desired effects rather than simply copying external appearances of techniques whose internal mechanisms remained hidden from practitioners who focused on surface details, while ignoring deeper principles that determine success or failure in actual combat situations. Sokonji's teaching methods created intellectual framework that enabled creative adaptation when standard approaches proved inadequate for addressing unique challenges that formal training could not anticipate or prepare students to handle through rigid adherence to predetermined responses. Giyu Tomioka's mastery of water breathing represented evolution beyond traditional forms toward personal innovation that honored essential principles while addressing individual strengths and tactical preferences that distinguished his approach from conventional applications of inherited techniques. The 11th form, Dead Calm, that he developed demonstrated how complete understanding enabled creation of new techniques that surpassed original forms through integration of advanced concepts that emerged from years of practical experience combined with intuitive grasp of underlying principles that governed all effective water breathing applications. The psychological aspects of water breathing training addressed emotional regulation and mental clarity as essential components of combat effectiveness, teaching practitioners how to maintain calm focus despite circumstances that might provoke panic or anger in less disciplined individuals, while providing tools for managing fear and uncertainty that could compromise judgment when clear thinking became matter of life and death. The flowing nature of water breathing philosophy created mental framework that enabled adaptation to changing conditions without losing essential stability that anchored tactical decision-making in solid principles rather than reactive improvisation. Thunder breathing emerged from Jigoro Kuwajima's understanding of how explosive speed could overcome supernatural advantages through techniques that concentrated all available power into moments of perfect timing that created opportunities for decisive action against opponents whose defensive capabilities might render conventional attacks ineffective. The former Thunder Hashira's approach to Demon Slayer education reflected wisdom gained through decades of experience with enemies whose abilities exceeded human limitations, unless countered through methods that transcended normal understanding of what mortal practitioners could achieve through proper training and spiritual development. The lightning-fast techniques that defined thunder breathing required practitioners to develop relationship with speed that approached supernatural levels while maintaining precision that ensured each movement served specific tactical purpose, rather than creating impressive displays that lacked practical effectiveness against enemies whose own capabilities might render ordinary quick movement inadequate for achieving combat objectives. The concentration of power into brief explosive moments demanded perfect timing that could only be achieved through understanding of rhythm and distance that connected individual technique to broader tactical awareness. Zenitsu Agatsuma's relationship with thunder breathing represented a unique case where unconscious competence exceeded conscious ability through psychological mechanisms that removed mental barriers and emotional interference that normally limited access to inherited potential. His sleep-fighting phenomenon demonstrated how technical mastery could exist independently of cognitive awareness, while raising questions about nature of human capability and relationship between conscious intention and bodily performance that challenged conventional understanding of how advanced techniques were learned and applied. The first form, Thunderclap and Flash, became Zenitsu's signature technique through obsessive focus on single element of thunder breathing curriculum that enabled him to achieve perfection that exceeded what comprehensive study might have produced. His dedication to mastering one technique completely, rather than learning multiple forms superficially, creating pathway to excellence that honored traditional training methods, while adapting them to individual, psychological, and physical characteristics that required unconventional approaches to achieve optimal results. The variations of Thunderclap and Flash that Zenitsu developed through his specialized focus demonstrated how deep understanding of single technique could generate creative applications that addressed diverse tactical situations while maintaining essential characteristics that made original form effective against demonic opponents. The sixfold, eightfold, and Godspeed applications that emerged from his dedicated practice created range of options that provided tactical flexibility while preserving unified approach to combat that prevented confusion during high-stress encounters where split-second decisions determined outcomes. The physical demands that thunder breathing placed on practitioners' legs and circulatory system required conditioning that pushed human physiology beyond normal limitations, while teaching lessons about how temporary enhancement could be achieved through proper breath control and muscular coordination that maximized explosive power without causing permanent damage to practitioners who understood appropriate limits and recovery requirements. The thunder-like sounds that accompanied proper technique execution served as audible confirmation that proper power generation had been achieved, while creating psychological effects that could intimidate opponents. The seventh form, Flaming Thunder God, that Zenitsu created to address his confrontation with Kaigaku, represented culmination of his specialized development path, while demonstrating how personal innovation could honor traditional principles while addressing unique circumstances that standard forms had not anticipated. The technique that combined his perfected speed with lethal precision created new standard for individual excellence within thunder-breathing tradition, while maintaining essential characteristics that connected his achievement to ancestral wisdom that had shaped the style's fundamental nature. Flame-breathing embodied the unwavering spirit and protective determination that characterized the Rengoku family legacy, their approach to Demon Slayer operations reflecting philosophical commitment to using power in service of others rather than personal glory, while maintaining optimism and enthusiasm that inspired those around them to achieve excellence that exceeded their previous limitations. The flame-like techniques that defined this breathing style created visual spectacle that matched their psychological impact while providing combat effectiveness that could protect entire communities from supernatural threats. Kyojiro Rengoku's mastery of flame breathing represented perfect integration of technique with personality, his natural enthusiasm and protective instincts finding expression through combat methods that channeled righteous fire into devastating attacks that purified evil while preserving everything good and innocent that demon slayers dedicated their lives to defending. His approach to instruction and leadership demonstrated how technical excellence could be combined with moral authority to create influence that extended far beyond individual combat capability. The 9 forms of flame breathing that comprised complete curriculum addressed range of tactical situations while teaching practitioners how to maintain burning determination, despite facing opponents whose power might seem impossible to overcome through normal human effort. Each technique embodying different aspect of flame philosophy, while contributing to comprehensive approach that could handle any challenge through proper application of inherited wisdom combined with individual creativity and spiritual strength that came from dedicating one's life to protecting others. The first form, unknowing fire, established foundation principles of flame, breathing through straightforward attacking technique that demonstrated how direct approach could prove most effective when executed with proper timing and positioning, teaching essential lesson that complexity was not always necessary for achieving decisive results against enemies who expected elaborate tactical maneuvers rather than simple applications of overwhelming power directed with surgical precision toward vital targets that would ensure immediate elimination of threats. Kyojiro's legendary battle against Akaza demonstrated flame-breathing philosophy and practical application, his willingness to accept mortal wounds rather than abandoning civilian protection, illustrating how technical mastery served moral purpose, while his continued fighting, despite fatal injuries, proved that proper spiritual development could transcend physical limitations when circumstances demanded ultimate sacrifice in service of principles that gave meaning to existence beyond mere survival. The 9th form, Purgatory, represented culmination of flame-breathing power through technique that channeled practitioners' complete life force into single devastating attack that could overcome any opposition while requiring total commitment that made survival secondary to achieving protective objectives that justified ultimate sacrifice. The dragon-like manifestation that accompanied this technique reflected spiritual dimensions of flame breathing that connected individual power to universal principles of justice and protection that transcended personal mortality. Stone breathing emerged from Gyomei Himejima's unique combination of physical power and spiritual depth, his massive frame and unconventional weapons, creating combat approach that differed dramatically from traditional sword-based techniques, while achieving effectiveness that established him as strongest demon slayer of current generation through methods that integrated prayer with violence in ways that sanctified necessary destruction while maintaining essential compassion for all living beings, including enemies whose evil nature required elimination. The Stone Hashira's approach to Demon Slayer operations reflected understanding that true strength came from spiritual foundation rather than mere physical capability. His obvious piety creating framework for decision-making that elevated tactical considerations to moral level, while his tears during combat demonstrated how genuine warrior could maintain emotional sensitivity despite engaging in activities that required taking life for protection of innocent people whose safety depended on his willingness to bear psychological burden of necessary violence. The 5 forms of stone breathing that comprised Gyomei's complete arsenal addressed different aspects of combat, while teaching practitioners how immovable defense could be combined with overwhelming offense through techniques that utilized unconventional weapons whose effectiveness exceeded traditional katana applications when properly coordinated with enhanced physical strength that came from years of conditioning that pushed human capability beyond normally achievable limits through systematic training and spiritual discipline. The spiked flail and axe combination that served as Gyomei's primary weapons reflected innovation that adapted Demon Slayer principles to individual strengths while creating tactical capabilities that no standard sword could provide. The chain that connected these implements, enabling flowing combinations that could transition from defensive applications to devastating attacks without pause or preparation, that might create opportunities for supernatural opponents to exploit momentary vulnerabilities during weapon transitions. The 3rd form, Stone Skin, demonstrated how defensive technique could become offensive through proper understanding of timing and positioning. The axe deflections that characterized this form, creating counterattack opportunities, while maintaining protective coverage that prevented enemies from exploiting apparent openings that less skilled practitioners might create through inadequate coordination between defensive and offensive applications during complex combat sequences that required simultaneous attention to multiple tactical requirements. Wind breathing represented most aggressive approach among foundation styles, its technique sacrificing defensive consideration in favor of overwhelming offensive power that could destroy enemies through sustained attack, that prevented counteraction while accepting personal risk that more cautious practitioners might consider unacceptable, despite tactical advantages that such commitment could create against opponents whose defensive capabilities might render conservative approaches inadequate for achieving decisive results within timeframes that civilian protection required. Sanemi Shinazugawa's scarred body provided visible testament to wind-breathing philosophy, each mark representing moment when defensive consideration had been abandoned in favor of offensive action that prioritized mission success over personal safety, while demonstrating how dedication to protecting others could justify accepting physical cost that served greater good rather than individual welfare. His aggressive personality reflected internalization of wind-breathing principles, while his obvious competence proved that such approach could achieve results that more balanced techniques might fail to produce. The 9 forms of wind-breathing curriculum emphasized wide-arcing attacks that could engage multiple opponents simultaneously while creating defensive zones through offensive action that prevented enemies from achieving tactical bases. Positioning that might enable coordinated assault against practitioner whose commitment to continuous attack left little energy for traditional defensive measures. The tornado-like visualizations that accompanied proper technique execution reflected chaotic nature of wind patterns while maintaining underlying control that directed apparent randomness towards specific tactical objectives. The acrobatic requirements that wind breathing imposed on practitioners demanded physical conditioning that enabled complex three-dimensional movement during combat, while maintaining weapon control and targeting precision that ensured effectiveness despite unconventional positioning that might compromise accuracy for less skilled operatives whose training had focused on ground-based techniques that provided stability at cost of tactical flexibility that aerial maneuvers could provide when properly executed. Sanemi's willingness to use his own Marechi blood as tactical weapon demonstrated how wind-breathing philosophy encouraged innovation that utilized individual characteristics as combat assets rather than limitations to be overcome. His understanding that his rare blood type could serve as both bait and weapon, creating strategic options that supplemented traditional techniques while providing examples of how creative thinking could enhance inherited methods without compromising their essential effectiveness against supernatural opponents whose capabilities required unconventional countermeasures. The derivative breathing styles that emerged from the foundation techniques represent humanity's endless capacity for innovation and adaptation, demonstrating how individual masters could take established principles and refine them through personal insight and specialized training to create combat methods that address specific tactical requirements, while maintaining connection to ancestral wisdom that provided their underlying power. These evolved techniques reflected deep understanding of how breathing styles could be modified without losing essential characteristics, their development requiring mastery so complete that practitioners could identify which elements were fundamental and which could be altered to better serve individual strengths or address particular types of supernatural threats. Mist breathing flowed from wind breathing's aggressive foundation through generations of refinement that transformed raw offensive power into subtle art of concealment and misdirection. Its techniques embodying philosophy that victory could be achieved through confusion and disorientation, rather than overwhelming force, while maintaining lethal effectiveness that made underestimation of its practitioners a fatal mistake. For demons whose expectations had been shaped by encounters with more straightforward combat styles, the evolution from wind to mist represented sophisticated understanding of how environmental factors could be incorporated into demon slayer techniques to create tactical advantages that supplemented individual skill with strategic thinking. Muichiro Tokito's prodigious mastery of mist breathing demonstrated how exceptional natural talent could accelerate normal development processes when combined with proper instruction and unlimited dedication to perfection. His achievement of Hashira status at age 14, representing unprecedented accomplishment that challenged conventional understanding of how long advanced technique development normally required. The Tokito bloodline's legendary capabilities provided genetic foundation for such extraordinary progress, while his personal commitment to excellence created conditions where inherited potential could be fully realized through training intensity that exceeded what ordinary practitioners could sustain. The philosophical principles that guided mist breathing development emphasized uncertainty and unpredictability as weapons that could overcome superior physical power through psychological effects that disrupted enemy decision-making processes while creating openings for attacks that more direct approaches might never achieve. The art of making oneself invisible while remaining deadly embodied. Advanced tactical thinking that recognized how perception could be manipulated to create advantages that raw strength could not provide, teaching lessons about combat that extended beyond simple technique to encompass deeper understanding of psychology and environmental awareness. The baggy clothing that mist-breathing practitioners wore served essential tactical purpose by concealing body positioning and movement patterns that enemies might use to predict attack directions or defensive preparations, creating visual confusion that supplemented technique-based misdirection, while providing practical advantages that could prove decisive in combat situations where split-second reactions determined outcomes. The coordination between equipment choices and fighting style demonstrated how every aspect of Demon Slayer preparation could contribute to operational effectiveness when properly understood and systematically applied. Muichiro's creation of the seventh form during his confrontation with Gokko illustrated how complete mastery enabled innovation under pressure. His ability to develop new technique in response to unique tactical challenge, proving that true understanding of breathing style principles could generate creative solutions that transcended formal training limitations. The obscuring clouds technique that emerged from this process represented perfect integration of mist breathing philosophy with practical combat requirements, while demonstrating how individual genius could expand inherited traditions without compromising their essential nature. The first form, low clouds near dispersal, established foundation principles of mist breathing through attack pattern that created visual confusion while delivering decisive strike from unexpected angle, teaching essential lesson that effectiveness could be enhanced through techniques that affected enemy perception rather than simply increasing destructive power. The flowing movements that characterized this form demonstrated how grace and lethality could be combined when practitioners understood how beauty could serve tactical purposes without sacrificing combat effectiveness. The second form, 8-layered mist, multiplied confusion effects through technique that created multiple false images while concealing true attack vector, its execution requiring perfect timing and positioning that could only be achieved through understanding of how visual deception could be integrated with precise blade work to create results that exceeded what either element could accomplish independently. The layered approach to misdirection reflected sophisticated tactical thinking that recognized how multiple simultaneous deceptions could overwhelm enemy analytical capabilities. The third form, scattering mist splash, addressed situations requiring rapid area coverage through technique that enabled engagement of multiple opponents while maintaining defensive awareness that prevented isolation during complex combat scenarios, where numerical disadvantage might prove fatal to practitioners whose technique focused on individual excellence rather than group combat applications. The splash-like pattern that characterized this form created tactical flexibility that could adapt to changing battlefield conditions without requiring lengthy preparation or repositioning. The fourth form, shifting flow slash, embodied mist breathing's emphasis on constant movement and position change through technique that prevented enemies from establishing targeting solutions while maintaining offensive pressure that created psychological stress and tactical confusion. The flowing transitions that connected attack to movement to defensive positioning demonstrated how complete integration of technical elements could create combat effectiveness that exceeded some of individual components when properly coordinated through systematic training and practical experience. The fifth form, Sea of Clouds and Haze, represented advanced application of concealment principles through technique that transformed entire combat environment into tactical advantage, while maintaining clarity of purpose that enabled precise strikes despite visual conditions that would compromise less skilled practitioners. The large-scale environmental effects that accompanied this form's execution demonstrated how individual technique could influence battlefield conditions in ways that created strategic rather than merely tactical advantages. The sixth form, Lunar Dispersing Mist, combined speed with concealment to create attack patterns that seem to violate physical laws regarding movement and positioning, its execution requiring coordination between breath control, footwork, and blade technique that approached supernatural levels of integration while maintaining human foundation that distinguished Demon Slayer abilities from blood demon arts that operated according to different principles. The lunar imagery that characterized this technique reflected understanding of how celestial patterns could provide models for combat movement. Sound breathing emerged from Tengen Uzui's unique background as shinobi, whose family traditions provided foundation for techniques that integrated explosive devices with supernatural swordsmanship, creating combat approach that transformed battle into artistic performance, while maintaining deadly effectiveness that justified theatrical elements through results that exceeded what conventional Demon Slayer methods could achieve against enemies whose capabilities required unconventional countermeasures. His flamboyant personality found perfect expression through breathing style that celebrated individual excellence while serving protective purposes that honored Demon Slayer principles. The musical score technique that formed intellectual foundation of sound breathing demonstrated how superhuman sensory abilities could be integrated with analytical thinking to create tactical advantages that provided detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities and behavioral patterns during combat engagement. Tengen's enhanced hearing enabled him to deconstruct opponent movements into rhythmic patterns that revealed timing, strength, and tactical intentions, while providing framework for coordinated response that could exploit identified weaknesses through precisely timed counterattacks. The two massive Nichiren cleavers that served as Tengen's primary weapons reflected adaptation of Demon Slayer principles to individual fighting style, while creating capabilities that no standard katana could provide, their size and weight requiring exceptional physical strength, while their chain connection enabled flowing combinations that could transition between offensive and defensive applications without pause or preparation that might create tactical vulnerabilities. The notches in their blades served functional purpose while contributing to visual spectacle that characterized sound breathing philosophy. The anti-demon bombs that Tengen incorporated into his combat techniques represented innovation that expanded Demon Slayer arsenal beyond traditional sword-based methods, while providing explosive power that could damage upper-ranked demons whose defensive capabilities might render conventional attacks inadequate for achieving decisive results. The integration of shinobi tools with breathing techniques demonstrated how family traditions could be preserved while adapting to new tactical requirements that Demon Slayer operations demanded. The first form, Raw, established foundation of sound, breathing through technique that concentrated overwhelming power into single devastating attack that could break through any defense while creating psychological impact that disrupted enemy confidence and potolemi. Tactical planning, the vertical slam that characterized this form, generated explosive force that exceeded what conventional sword techniques could produce, while maintaining precision that ensured energy was directed toward maximum effect rather than wasted through inefficient movement patterns. The fourth form, constant resounding slashes, demonstrated how sustained offensive pressure could be maintained through technique that combined rapid weapon movement with explosive enhancement to create continuous threat that prevented enemy recovery or counterattack preparation, while maintaining practitioner mobility that enabled position adjustment according to changing tactical requirements. The spinning motion that defined this form created defensive coverage, while generating offensive power through centrifugal force that multiplied striking effectiveness. The fifth form, String Performance, represented pinnacle of sound-breathing artistry through technique that utilized chain connection between weapons to create attack patterns that seemed to defy physical limitations while maintaining lethal precision that ensured decorative. Elements served practical combat purposes rather than mere visual display. The reverse grip positioning that characterized this form's execution required exceptional weapon control while enabling movements that conventional grip arrangements could not accommodate. The philosophical integration between sound breathing and musical principles reflected Tengen's understanding that combat could embody aesthetic values without sacrificing effectiveness. When artistic sensibilities guided tactical choices towards solutions that achieved both functional and beautiful results, his approach to Demon Slayer operations demonstrated how individual personality could enhance rather than compromise professional capability when personal characteristics aligned with technical requirements that breathing style development demanded. The Entertainment District arc provided perfect venue for sound breathing's unique capabilities, urban environment, and civilian protection requirements, creating tactical situation where Tengen's specialized skills proved ideally suited for challenges that more conventional Demon Slayer approaches might have struggled to address effectively. His coordination with younger operatives during this mission demonstrated how experienced practitioners could adapt their methods to support team operations while maintaining individual effectiveness that contributed to collective success. The confrontation with Daki and Gyutaro that climaxed this mission tested sound breathing against opponents whose coordinate abilities and blood demon arts created tactical complexity that required integration of all available techniques, while maintaining protection responsibilities that prevented purely offensive approaches to conflict resolution. The explosive finale that resolved this encounter demonstrated how sound breathing philosophy could achieve spectacular results that honored both practical necessity and artistic vision without compromising essential Demon Slayer principles. The breathing styles that emerged from the heart's deepest emotions represent humanity's most profound understanding of how love and beauty could be transformed into protective power. Their techniques embodying principles that connected individual feelings to universal forces, while maintaining deadly effectiveness that proved gentleness and strength, were not opposing qualities, but complementary aspects of complete warrior development. These styles demonstrated how personal characteristics that might seem incompatible with combat excellence could become sources of unprecedented capability when properly channeled through breathing techniques that honored emotional authenticity while serving tactical requirements that Demon Slayer Opération demanded. Love breathing flowed from Mitsuri Kanroji's unique physiology and emotional nature through adaptation of flame-breathing principles that recognized how individual differences could be transformed into advantages rather than limitations. When training methods acknowledged personal characteristics as foundations for specialized development rather than obstacles to overcome through standardized approaches. Her creation of this distinctive style reflected understanding that true mastery emerged from harmony between technique and personality, rather than forcing artificial conformity to predetermined patterns that might suppress natural gifts, while failing to achieve optimal effectiveness. The extraordinary muscle density that characterized Mitsuri's physical composition provided foundation for strength that exceeded normal human limitations while maintaining flexibility and speed that conventional muscular development typically compromised, her body representing perfect balance between power and agility that enabled techniques requiring simultaneous expression of seemingly contradictory physical capabilities. The compact efficiency of her enhanced musculature created appearance that concealed devastating potential beneath feminine grace. while providing tactical advantage through enemy underestimation of her actual combat capabilities. The whip-like katana that served as primary weapon for love-breathing reflected necessity of adapting standard Demon Slayer equipment to accommodate fighting style that required flexibility exceeding what rigid blade could provide. Its unique construction, enabling movements that transformed swordsmanship into flowing dance, while maintaining cutting power necessary for demon elimination. The weapon's unusual characteristics required specialized forging techniques that produced blade capable of maintaining structural integrity despite demands that would destroy conventional swords through stress patterns that normal metallurgy could not accommodate. The emotional foundation that powered love-breathing techniques drew strength from Mitsuri's genuine affection for people she protected, while channeling protective instincts through combat applications that transformed caring feelings into devastating attacks whose power derived from spiritual source rather than mere physical capability. Her ability to access enhanced strength through emotional connection demonstrated how proper breathing style development could integrate psychological and physiological systems to create results that exceeded what either component could achieve independently. The first form, Shivers of First Love, established love-breathing principles through attack pattern that embodied nervous excitement and anticipatory energy, characteristic of romantic awakening, while delivering strikes that could penetrate any defense through power generated by emotional intensity rather than muscular tension. The flexible weapon movements that defined this technique created unpredictable attack vectors that confused enemies whose defensive preparations assumed conventional sword trajectory patterns while maintaining lethal precision that ensured emotional expression, served practical combat purposes. The second form, Love Pangs, embodied psychological and physical sensations associated with deep affection through technique that concentrated protective instincts into focused attacks, designed to eliminate threats to beloved individuals whose safety provided motivation that transcended personal survival considerations. The multiple striking pattern that characterized this form reflected understanding that love multiplied rather than diminished individual capability when properly channeled through breathing techniques that transformed emotion into enhanced performance. The third form, Cat Love Shower, demonstrated how playful aspects of affection could be weaponized through technique that combined graceful movement with devastating effectiveness while maintaining joy and spontaneity that distinguished love-based combat from grim determination that characterized more serious breathing styles. The shower-like attack pattern created comprehensive coverage that could engage multiple opponents while maintaining protective focus that prevented enemies from threatening individuals whose welfare motivated technique development and practical application. The fourth form, Tender Affection, represented mature understanding of how deep caring could be expressed through combat applications that protected loved ones while honoring their dignity and worth through techniques that eliminated threats without celebrating destruction or taking pleasure in necessary violence. The flowing movements that defined this form demonstrated how genuine affection could guide tactical decision-making towards solutions that achieved protective objectives while maintaining spiritual foundation that prevented corruption through repeated exposure to combat requirements. The fifth form, Swaying Love Wildly, embodied passionate intensity that could overcome any obstacle through emotional power that transcended normal human limitations, while maintaining control that prevented destructive excess that might compromise protective objectives or cause collateral damage to innocent people whose safety remained primary consideration despite tactical advantages that more aggressive approaches might provide. The wild swaying motion that characterized this technique created visual confusion while delivering precise strikes that achieved elimination without unnecessary brutality. The sixth form, cat-legged winds of love, represented pinnacle of love, breathing development through technique that integrated all previous forms into flowing sequence that could be maintained indefinitely while adapting to changing combat conditions through flexibility that mirrored emotional adaptability, characteristic of genuine affection. The upside-down twirling motion that defined this form's execution required exceptional physical conditioning while creating attack patterns that seemed to violate gravitational constraints through technique that transformed limitation into advantage. Mitsuri's personality perfectly complemented her breathing style development, her natural enthusiasm and genuine care for others, providing emotional foundation that sustained technique effectiveness, while her physical gifts enabled practical applications that validated theoretical principles through results that proved love-based combat could achieve tactical objectives that more conventional approaches might struggle to accomplish. Her integration into Hashira operations demonstrated how individual uniqueness could enhance rather than compromise organizational effectiveness when properly supported and appropriately deployed. The dietary requirements that supported Mitsuri's enhanced physical capabilities reflected metabolic demands that accompanied supernatural strength and flexibility, her enormous appetite serving practical purpose while providing insight into physiological costs associated with maintaining capabilities that exceeded normal human limitations through breathing technique applications that pushed bodily systems beyond typically sustainable performance levels. The specialized nutrition that her condition required created understanding of how individual characteristics influenced operational planning and resource allocation. Flower breathing represented evolution of water breathing principles through feminine perspective that emphasized grace, precision, and tactical deception rather than overwhelming power or aggressive confrontation. Its techniques embodying understanding that victory could be achieved through subtlety and superior technique rather than brute force applications that might prove inadequate against enemies whose supernatural capabilities exceeded what conventional approaches could overcome. The flower-based imagery that characterized this style reflected appreciation for beauty that did not compromise effectiveness, while creating combat philosophy that honored aesthetic values alongside tactical requirements. Kanai Kocho's development of flower breathing demonstrated how individual insight could refine inherited techniques through personal understanding that identified opportunities for improvement within established traditions while maintaining essential characteristics that made original style effective against demonic opponents. Her gentle nature found expression through breathing style that channeled protective instincts through techniques that achieved elimination objectives while minimizing unnecessary suffering for creatures whose evil nature resulted from transformation rather than original malevolence that characterized truly wicked beings. The tragic circumstances of Kanei's death at hands of Doma illustrated how even advanced breathing style mastery could prove insufficient when facing upper-ranked demons whose capabilities exceeded human limitations despite years of dedicated training and spiritual development. Her sacrifice, providing motivation for Sister's continued Demon Slayer service while demonstrating costs associated with confronting supernatural evil that possessed power, approaching that of demon progenitor himself. The legacy of wisdom and technique that she left behind continued to influence Demon Slayer operations through students who preserved and developed her innovations. Kanao Tsuyuri's adoption into Kocho family provided opportunity for flower-breathing transmission to practitioner whose traumatic background had created psychological adaptations that complemented technique requirements while her natural physical gifts enabled mastery that honored inherited tradition while developing personal innovations that addressed individual circumstances and tactical preferences. Her relationship with coin-based decision-making reflected damage that required healing through connection with people who valued her autonomy and individual growth, rather than viewing her as a tool for achieving predetermined objectives. The visual enhancement capabilities that flower breathing provided through advanced technique applications came with costs that required careful consideration of when such abilities should be employed, the strain placed on practitioners' eyesight, creating tactical situation where enhanced perception had to be balanced against long-term consequences that could compromise future effectiveness if overused during less critical encounters. The physiological demands that these techniques imposed reflected reality, that supernatural capabilities extracted prices that practitioners accepted in service of protecting others, despite personal consequences. The 7 forms of flower breathing each addressed different aspects of combat while teaching principles about how deceptive movement could be integrated with lethal precision to create effectiveness that exceeded what more straightforward approaches might achieve against enemies whose defensive capabilities or tactical awareness made conventional attacks inadequate for achieving decisive results. The flower and fruit imagery that characterized form names reflected understanding that growth, beauty, and nourishment could provide metaphorical framework for techniques whose practical applications serve protective purposes. The first form, second form Honorable Shadow Plum, demonstrated how initial techniques could be modified through variations that addressed specific tactical situations while maintaining essential characteristics that made original applications effective. The shadow element, adding deceptive component that created confusion, while plum imagery honored traditional associations with resilience and beauty that characterized flower-breathing philosophy. The execution of this form required timing and positioning that could only be achieved through complete understanding of how visual deception could be integrated with precise blade work. The final form, Equinoctial Vermilion Eye, represented ultimate expression of flower-breathing capabilities through technique that pushed visual enhancement beyond normal human limitations while creating tactical advantages that could prove decisive against opponents whose speed or technique might otherwise exceed practitioners' ability to respond effectively. The tremendous strain that this form imposed on users' vision reflected reality that accessing supernatural capabilities required accepting costs that made such techniques appropriate only for situations where alternatives had been exhausted and civilian lives depended on achieving results, regardless of personal consequences. Kanau's application of flower breathing during confrontation with Doma demonstrated how inherited techniques could be combined with personal innovation to create tactical approaches that addressed unique challenges while honoring traditions that provided foundation for individual development. Her willingness to sacrifice her eyesight through repeated use of visual enhancement techniques illustrated commitment to protective objectives that transcended personal welfare, while proving that flower-breathing philosophy could inspire ultimate dedication when circumstances demanded such sacrifice in service of others whose safety justified accepting permanent consequences. The relationship between flower-breathing and insect-breathing that developed through Kocho family dynamics created complementary approaches to demon slayer operations that address different aspects of supernatural combat while maintaining shared commitment to protecting innocent people from demonic predation. The combination of Kanei's grace with Shinobu's scientific innovation demonstrated how individual differences could enhance collective effectiveness when family bonds provided foundation for cooperation that transcended competitive impulses. while maintaining individual excellence that contributed to organizational capability. The visual beauty that characterized flower-breathing execution provided psychological benefits that sustained practitioner morale, while creating tactical advantages through enemy distraction that could create openings for decisive attacks when opponents became mesmerized by graceful movements that concealed lethal intent. The aesthetic dimension of combat that flower breathing embodied demonstrated how appreciation for beauty could be maintained, even within contexts that required violence for protective purposes, creating philosophical framework that prevented brutalization through repeated exposure to necessary but morally challenging activities. Insect breathing emerged from Shinobu Kocho's profound understanding that physical limitations need not prevent achievement of Demon Slayer excellence when intellectual capability could be applied to create innovative solutions that transformed apparent weaknesses into tactical advantages through scientific knowledge and precise technique application that prioritized efficiency over raw power, while maintaining deadly effectiveness against supernatural opponents whose strength exceeded what conventional swordsmanship could overcome through traditional approaches. Her revolutionary adaptation of Demon Slayer principles demonstrated how individual circumstances could inspire creativity that expanded organizational capabilities while honoring essential mission objectives that required elimination of demonic threats regardless of practitioners' physical characteristics. The personal tragedy that motivated Shinobu's breathing style development began with her beloved sister Kane's death at the hands of Doma, an upper moon demon whose power had proven sufficient to overcome flower-breathing mastery. Despite years of dedicated training and spiritual development that should have provided adequate preparation for confronting supernatural evil. The loss of someone whose gentle nature and protective instincts had shaped Shinobu's own understanding of Demon Slayer responsibilities created emotional foundation that transformed grief into determination while channeling scientific curiosity toward practical applications that could achieve results where conventional strength had failed. The poison-based approach that defined insect breathing reflected Shinobu's medical background and analytical thinking, her understanding of demon physiology, enabling development of chemical compounds that could achieve elimination through biological processes rather than physical damage that required strength she did not possess. The wisteria-based toxins that formed foundation of her combat effectiveness represented synthesis of traditional Demon Slayer knowledge with modern scientific methods, creating weapons that operated according to biochemical principles rather than mechanical force, while maintaining lethal effectiveness that justified unconventional approach to supernatural combat. The specialized katana that enabled insect breathing applications embodied innovation that adapted standard Demon Slayer equipment to serve unique tactical requirements. Its needle-like tip, providing delivery system for poison, while maintaining appearance that concealed revolutionary modification from enemies whose experience with conventional swords would not prepare them for techniques that operated according to different principles. The stinger design that characterized this weapon reflected understanding that nature provided models for effective combat applications when properly studied and systematically adapted to human use through engineering that honored biological principles. The 4 forms that comprised complete insect breathing curriculum each addressed different aspects of poison delivery, while teaching practitioners how medical knowledge could be weaponized without compromising healing philosophy that distinguished protective applications from malevolent uses of similar techniques. The integration of stabbing, thrusting, and precise cutting motions created comprehensive approach to combat that maximized contact opportunities, while ensuring toxin delivery through methods that achieved rapid elimination, despite lacking physical power that traditional demon slayer techniques required for achieving decisive results. Through conventional means, the first form, Butterfly Dance Caprice, established foundation, principles of insect breathing through technique that combined graceful movement with precise targeting while embodying understanding that beauty and lethality could coexist when proper training integrated aesthetic appreciation with tactical effectiveness. The butterfly-like motion that characterized this form created visual poetry that concealed deadly purpose while providing multiple contact opportunities that ensured poison delivery even if individual strikes failed to achieve optimal penetration depth or placement accuracy that perfect execution would have provided. The aerial approach that this form required demonstrated how insect breathing philosophy embraced three-dimensional combat environments while utilizing mobility advantages that compensated for physical limitations through superior positioning and timing that created tactical superiority over opponents whose expectations had been shaped by ground-based combat experiences. The leaping attack pattern that defined butterfly dance execution required exceptional balance and spatial awareness while providing psychological impact that disrupted enemy concentration through unexpected approach vectors that conventional defensive preparations could not adequately address. The multiple striking sequence that concluded butterfly dance applications ensured comprehensive toxin delivery through repeated contact that overcame defensive capabilities or anatomical variations that might render single application insufficient for achieving elimination objectives within acceptable time frames. The rapid succession of precise strikes demonstrated how speed and accuracy could substitute for power when proper technique enabled maximum efficiency in poison delivery, while maintaining practitioner safety through methods that minimized exposure to counterattack opportunities during vulnerable execution phases. The dance of the centipede represented advanced application of insect breathing principles through technique that utilized maximum speed to create confusion, while establishing optimal positioning for neck targeting that ensured rapid elimination through toxin delivery to vital areas where circulation would distribute poison throughout enemy system with maximum efficiency. The zigzag movement pattern that characterized this form reflected understanding that unpredictable approach routes could overcome superior physical capabilities through psychological disruption that compromised defensive response timing while creating opportunities for decisive action. The speed requirements that Dance of the Centipede imposed on practitioners demanded physical conditioning that pushed human limitations, while maintaining precision that ensured tactical effectiveness, despite velocity that might compromise accuracy for less skilled operatives whose training had not adequately prepared them for combat applications requiring simultaneous attention to movement, positioning, and targeting considerations. Doma's observation about bridge destruction capabilities illustrated how proper technique execution generated forces that exceeded what practitioners' physical characteristics might suggest possible through conventional analysis. The neck targeting focus that distinguished this form from more general combat applications reflected understanding that poison effectiveness depended on circulatory access that could be optimized through anatomical knowledge applied to tactical decision-making during high-speed engagement, where targeting opportunities might be limited by temporal constraints and defensive interference. The direct approach that characterized centipede dance philosophy demonstrated confidence in technique effectiveness that justified accepting risks associated with commitment to specific attack patterns rather than maintaining tactical flexibility that might compromise elimination certainty. The dance of the dragonfly embodied ultimate expression of insect-breathing philosophy through technique that maximized poison delivery through systematic targeting of multiple vital areas whose simultaneous compromise would ensure elimination, regardless of enemy regeneration capabilities or defensive adaptations that might render single-point applications inadequate for achieving decisive results. The six-strike sequence that defined this form represented culmination of medical knowledge applied to combat situations where comprehensive approach proved necessary for overcoming supernatural opponents whose capabilities exceeded what conventional elimination methods could reliably address. The weak spot targeting that guided dragonfly dance applications required anatomical expertise that enabled identification of optimal contact points where poison absorption would be maximized, while defensive interference would be minimized. Through understanding of how demonic physiology differed from human systems in ways that created both vulnerabilities and resistances that tactical planning had to accommodate, the heart and torso emphasis that characterized target selection reflected knowledge about circulatory patterns that would ensure rapid distribution of toxins while preventing enemy adaptation or recovery that might compromise technique. Effectiveness. The large-dose philosophy that motivated dragonfly dance development recognized that some opponents required concentrated poison applications that exceeded what gradual accumulation could achieve within acceptable timeframes. The multiple simultaneous deliveries creating toxin concentrations that could overcome enhanced demonic resistance while ensuring elimination despite regeneration capabilities that might neutralize smaller applications before achieving lethal concentrations. The desperation that accompanied this technique's deployment reflected understanding that such comprehensive commitment represented final tactical option when conventional approaches had proven inadequate. Shinobu's personal characteristics perfectly complemented insect breathing requirements, her petite stature and graceful movement, providing foundation for techniques that relied on precision rather than power, while her intellectual capabilities enabled scientific applications that transformed theoretical knowledge into practical combat advantages. Her cheerful demeanor concealed profound anger and determination that motivated continued Demon Slayer service, despite personal losses that might have overwhelmed practitioners whose emotional foundation was less firmly established through commitment to protective objectives that transcended individual welfare. The butterfly mansion that served as Shinobu's operational base reflected integration of medical facility with Demon Slayer support services, creating environment where healing and combat preparation could coexist, while providing resources necessary for poison development and technique refinement that insect breathing applications required. The research capabilities that this location provided enabled systematic study of demon physiology while maintaining treatment facilities that addressed wounded operatives, whose recovery supported continued organizational effectiveness against supernatural threats. The training methods that Shinobu employed for rehabilitation services demonstrated how medical knowledge could be applied to enhance Demon Slayer capabilities, while addressing individual limitations that might compromise operational effectiveness without proper attention to physical conditioning and technique adaptation. Her approach to instruction reflected understanding that each practitioner required individualized attention that acknowledged personal characteristics as foundations for specialized development, rather than obstacles to overcome through standardized approaches that might suppress natural gifts. The relationship between insect breathing and flower breathing that developed through Kocho family dynamics created complementary approaches that honored shared commitment to protecting innocent people while expressing different aspects of feminine strength that challenged conventional assumptions about warrior identity and combat effectiveness. The combination of Kane's gentle grace with Shinobu's scientific precision demonstrated how individual differences could enhance collective capability when family bonds provided foundation for cooperation that transcended competitive impulses. The final confrontation with Doma that tested insect breathing against upper moon capabilities represented ultimate validation of innovative approach to Demon Slayer operations, while illustrating costs associated with dedication that prioritized mission success over personal survival when circumstances demanded ultimate sacrifice in service of objectives that exceeded individual welfare. The poisoning strategy that Shinobu had prepared through careful planning and personal consumption of toxins demonstrated how complete commitment could transform apparent defeat into tactical victory that served broader organizational goals. The legacy that insect breathing would carry forward through its revolutionary impact on Demon Slayer understanding reflected proof that innovation could expand traditional capabilities while maintaining essential mission focus that required elimination of demonic threats, regardless of conventional wisdom about appropriate methods or acceptable approaches to supernatural combat. The scientific foundation that Shinobu had established would continue to influence future developments while honoring memory of practitioner whose creativity had demonstrated that apparent limitations could become sources of unprecedented strength when properly understood and systematically addressed. Beast breathing emerged from the untamed wilderness where Inosuke Hashibira's survival depended upon understanding predator instincts and adapting human limitations to match animal capabilities that had been refined through millions of years of evolution. His self-taught techniques, representing pure expression of natural combat philosophy that rejected formal training in favor of intuitive knowledge, gained through direct confrontation with death in environments where theoretical understanding proved worthless against immediate threats that required instinctive response patterns. The mountain forests that shaped his development provided education that no human institution could replicate, their harsh lessons creating warrior whose capabilities transcended conventional Demon Slayer, training through methods that honored animal wisdom rather than human tradition. The boar mask that concealed Inosuke's features served multiple purposes beyond simple protection, its intimidating appearance reflecting psychological warfare that utilized fear as weapon, while providing sensory enhancement that improved spatial awareness and environmental detection capabilities necessary for survival in wilderness conditions where supernatural threats could emerge from any direction without warning. The hollow eyes and snarling expression that characterized this headgear created visual impact that disrupted enemy confidence, while concealing human features that might reveal emotional states or tactical intentions to opponents whose experience with conventional demon slayers had taught them to read facial expressions for combat intelligence. The dual Nichiren blades that Inosuke wielded reflected adaptation of standard demon slayer equipment to serve combat style that prioritized aggressive offense over defensive consideration. Their chipped and serrated edges providing enhanced cutting capability, while their unconventional grip arrangements enabled techniques that conventional swordsmanship training would have considered impossible or impractical. The jagged appearance that resulted from his modification methods created weapons that matched their wielder's wild nature, while maintaining structural integrity necessary for demon elimination, despite abuse that would destroy more delicate implements through stress patterns that formal blade maintenance sought to prevent. The seventh form, spatial awareness, represented pinnacle of beast breathing philosophy through technique that transformed enhanced sensory perception into tactical advantage that could overcome visual limitations while providing intelligence about enemy positions, and capabilities through environmental analysis that detected subtle air disturbances created by movement, breathing, and presence. The mountain-wide detection capability that Inosuke demonstrated during demon encounters illustrated how proper development of natural gifts could achieve results that exceeded what technological enhancement might provide through understanding of how atmospheric conditions carried information that trained senses could interpret. The tactile sensitivity that enabled spatial awareness applications required conditioning that pushed human sensory capabilities beyond normal limitations, while maintaining analytical processing that could translate physical sensations into actionable intelligence during combat situations where visual confirmation might be impossible or misleading. The ability to identify demon locations throughout entire mountainous regions demonstrated how individual characteristics could be developed into supernatural capabilities when proper training methods acknowledged natural gifts as foundations for specialized development, rather than curiosities to be suppressed in favor of standardized approaches. The 10 standard forms of beast breathing that comprised Inosuke's complete arsenal each embodied different aspects of animal behavior, while teaching practitioners how predator instincts could be channeled into human combat, applications that achieved elimination objectives through methods that conventional training would have considered too chaotic or unpredictable for reliable battlefield deployment. The straightforward yet wild nature that characterized these techniques reflected understanding that complexity was not always necessary for effectiveness, when proper execution could achieve decisive results through approaches that confused enemies, whose defensive preparations assumed more predictable attack patterns. The first form, Pierce, established foundation principles of beast breathing through direct assault technique that embodied charging predator mentality while demonstrating how commitment to aggressive action could overcome defensive advantages through sheer determination that refused to acknowledge retreat as viable option. The dual-blade execution that characterized this form created multiple simultaneous threats that divided enemy attention, while maximizing contact opportunities that ensured at least one strike would achieve penetration despite defensive efforts that might deflect individual attacks. The second form, Slice, demonstrated how sweeping motions could be integrated with beast breathing philosophy to create techniques that addressed multiple opponents while maintaining offensive momentum that prevented tactical stagnation during complex combat. Scenarios where numerical disadvantage required approaches that could engage several enemies without creating vulnerability periods during transition between targets. The wide-arcing slashes that defined this technique provided comprehensive coverage while embodying animal territoriality that refused to yield ground to any threat regardless of apparent superiority in numbers or individual capability. The third form, Devour, embodied predator feeding behavior through technique that concentrated maximum destructive power into confined areas where enemy escape. Options were limited by environmental factors or tactical positioning that trapped them within range of attacks whose intensity exceeded what conventional defensive measures could withstand. The consuming nature that characterized this form's execution reflected understanding that some situations required absolute commitment to elimination rather than tactical maneuvering that might allow enemies to recover or adapt to combat approaches. The fourth form, Slice and Dice, represented combination technique that integrated multiple beast-breathing principles into flowing sequence that could maintain offensive pressure while adapting to changing combat conditions through flexibility that mirrored animal hunting adaptability when prey behavior required modification of attack patterns. The alternating cutting motions that defined this form created unpredictable rhythm that disrupted enemy defensive timing while ensuring continuous contact that accumulated damage, even when individual strikes failed to achieve optimal penetration or placement accuracy. The fifth form, Crazy Cutting, embodied complete abandonment of conventional tactical restraint through technique that prioritized maximum offensive output over personal safety considerations, while demonstrating how berserker mentality could enhance, rather than compromise, combat effectiveness when properly channeled through breathing methods that maintained essential control despite apparent chaos. The frenzied striking pattern that characterized this form created overwhelming assault that few enemies could withstand, while reflecting animal desperation that transformed cornered situations into opportunities for decisive action. Through psychological commitment that transcended rational fear, the sixth form, Pouncing, demonstrated how three-dimensional movement could be integrated with beast-breathing principles to create attack patterns that utilized aerial positioning and gravitational acceleration to enhance striking power while providing psychological impact that disrupted enemy concentration through unexpected approach vectors that conventional ground-based defensive preparations could not adequately address. The leaping assault that defined this technique reflected predator hunting behavior that utilized environmental advantages to overcome prey defensive capabilities through superior positioning rather than relying solely on individual strength or speed. The eighth form, Explosive Rush, concentrated all available power into sustained charging attack that could overcome any obstacle through momentum that built continuously during execution, while demonstrating how proper breath control could maintain energy output that exceeded normal human limitations for extended periods when tactical situations required persistent offensive pressure. The rushing motion that characterized this form embodied pack hunting behavior that utilized coordinated movement to overwhelm prey defensive capabilities through approaches that individual action might not achieve despite superior technique or equipment advantage. The ninth form, Extending Bendy Slash, demonstrated how weapon flexibility could be maximized through technique that pushed blade manipulation beyond conventional limits, while maintaining cutting effectiveness that achieved elimination objectives despite unconventional approach, methods that formal training would have considered impractical or dangerous. The extending motion that defined this form reflected understanding that combat situations sometimes required creative solutions that transcended standard equipment capabilities when proper technique could compensate for apparent limitations through innovative applications. The 10th form, Whirling Fangs, represented ultimate expression of beast-breathing philosophy through technique that combined all previous forms into comprehensive assault that could address any tactical situation while maintaining chaotic unpredictability that made defensive preparation impossible for enemies whose experience with conventional demon slayers had not prepared them for approaches that operated according to animal rather than human logic. The whirling motion that characterized this form created continuous threat from multiple angles while embodying pack hunting coordination that achieved through individual excellence what group tactics normally required. The improvisation capability that Inosuke demonstrated during his confrontation with Doma illustrated how complete understanding of beast-breathing principles enabled creative adaptation under pressure when standard techniques proved inadequate for addressing unique challenges that formal training could not have anticipated. The sudden inspiration technique that emerged during this encounter demonstrated how proper foundation enabled innovation that honored established philosophy while addressing immediate tactical requirements through solutions that preserved essential characteristics while adapting to unprecedented circumstances. The social development that accompanied Inosuke's integration into formal Demon Slayer operations created interesting contrast between his wild nature and organizational requirements that demanded cooperation and coordination with partners whose training backgrounds and personality characteristics differed dramatically from wilderness survival methods that had shaped his approach to combat and interpersonal relationships. The gradual adaptation that characterized his team interactions demonstrated how individual excellence could be maintained while developing collaborative capabilities that enhanced collective effectiveness without compromising personal identity or technical proficiency. The territorial instincts that governed much of Inosuke's early behavior reflected animal psychology that had been necessary for survival in environments where competition for resources required constant vigilance and aggressive response to any perceived threat to personal domain or status. Within hierarchical systems that determined access to necessities, the modification of these patterns through exposure to genuine cooperation and shared objectives demonstrated how proper social environment could channel competitive instincts toward productive purposes while maintaining individual excellence that contributed to group success. The relationship between beast breathing and wind breathing that some scholars theorized reflected distant connection between Inosuke's self-taught techniques and formal demon slayer traditions suggested that individual innovation could sometimes rediscover principles that institutional knowledge had preserved through different methodological approaches. The similarities in aggressive philosophy and offensive emphasis that characterized both styles provided evidence that certain combat truths transcended specific training backgrounds when practitioners achieved sufficient understanding of fundamental principles that governed effective supernatural warfare. The teaching potential that Inosuke's unique perspective provided to formal Demon Slayer education demonstrated how individual experience could enrich institutional knowledge when unconventional approaches were properly evaluated and systematically integrated into established curricula that benefited from exposure to alternative methodologies. His ability to achieve results that matched or exceeded formally trained operatives through self-developed techniques suggested that current training methods might be enhanced through incorporation of wilderness survival principles and animal behavior studies that could provide new insights into combat effectiveness and tactical innovation. The psychological resilience that beast-breathing development required reflected harsh realities of wilderness survival, where mental weakness could prove fatal during encounters with natural predators whose capabilities exceeded human limitations, unless properly countered through techniques that accessed reserves of strength and determination that civilized existence rarely demanded. The conditioning that mountain life imposed created mental toughness that proved invaluable during demon encounters, where psychological pressure could compromise technique effectiveness if practitioners lacked sufficient emotional stability to maintain focus despite horrifying circumstances. Serpent breathing emerged from Obanai Iguro's profound understanding that conventional approaches to combat could be transcended through techniques that embodied the sinuous unpredictability of serpentine movement his twisted blade and unconventional methodology, reflecting personal journey through trauma that had shaped his worldview toward distrust of direct confrontation, while creating tactical philosophy that achieved victory through misdirection, and psychological warfare that confused enemies whose expectations had been formed through encounters with more straightforward demon slayer techniques. The serpent that had terrorized his childhood became a paradoxical source of inspiration for breathing style that transformed victimization into empowerment through understanding that survival sometimes required adopting characteristics of those who had caused suffering. The Indonesian Chris-style blade that enabled serpent breathing applications represented revolutionary departure from standard demon slayer equipment. Its wavy design, reflecting understanding that effectiveness could be enhanced through weapons whose unconventional characteristics created tactical advantages that compensated for wielders' physical limitations while providing capabilities that conventional swords could never achieve, regardless of their superior metallurgy or traditional craftsmanship. The serpentine curves that characterized this blade's construction enabled cutting angles and binding techniques that confused opponents whose defensive training had prepared them for straight-line attacks rather than approaches that seemed to violate geometric principles governing normal swordsmanship. The 5 forms that comprised complete serpent breathing curriculum each embodied different aspects of snake behavior while teaching practitioners how deceptive movement could be weaponized through techniques that struck from impossible angles while maintaining deadly precision that ensured elimination despite approaches that appeared chaotic or unpredictable to observers, whose understanding remained limited to conventional combat philosophy. The slithering motions that characterized these techniques created visual confusion that disrupted enemy analytical capabilities while providing psychological pressure that compromised defensive effectiveness through anxiety about attacks whose timing and direction remained impossible to anticipate. The first form, Winding Serpent Slash, established foundation principles of serpent breathing through technique that demonstrated how indirect approach could prove more effective than straightforward assault when proper execution created multiple simultaneous threats that divided enemy attention while maintaining offensive momentum that prevented tactical recovery during moments of confusion. The meandering path that characterized this form's blade movement reflected understanding that shortest distance between 2 points was not always optimal route when tactical considerations required approaches that maximized psychological impact while minimizing defensive interference. The undulating motion that defined winding serpent execution required exceptional weapon control and spatial awareness that could only be developed through training methods that abandoned conventional grip arrangements in favor of handling techniques that enabled fluid transitions between cutting angles that conventional swordsmanship would have considered impossible to achieve without compromising striking power or accuracy. The serpentine visualization that accompanied proper technique demonstrated how mental imagery could enhance physical performance when practitioner achieved complete integration between conscious intention and unconscious movement patterns. The binding capabilities that serpent breathing techniques provided through weapon design created tactical options that standard demon slayer approaches could not replicate. The twisted blade's ability to catch and redirect enemy weapons, transforming defensive actions into offensive opportunities, while demonstrating how proper equipment adaptation could multiply individual effectiveness through methods that honored unconventional thinking over traditional approaches. The entangling potential that characterized serpent breathing philosophy reflected understanding that victory could be achieved through control rather than destruction, when circumstances favored approaches that neutralized threats without requiring overwhelming force. The second form, Venom Fangs of the Narrowhead, embodied concentrated lethality that focused all available power into precise strikes that targeted vital points with accuracy that exceeded what broad-based attacks could achieve, while maintaining serpent-like patience that enabled optimal timing rather than premature action that might compromise technique effectiveness. The narrow focus that characterized this form's application reflected understanding that efficiency often proved superior to overwhelming force, when proper technique could achieve decisive results through minimal expenditure of energy or resources that might be needed for extended combat. Engagement. The venomous imagery that accompanied this technique's visualization connected serpent breathing philosophy to natural world understanding that recognized how some predators achieve dominance through specialized capabilities rather than general superiority, their effectiveness resulting from adaptation to specific ecological niches that rewarded precision over power, while maintaining lethal potential that could overcome opponents whose advantages lay in different areas. The psychological impact that Venom Association created provided additional tactical benefit through fear that compromised enemy decision-making processes during critical moments when confidence might determine outcomes. The third form, Coil Choke, demonstrated how serpent breathing principles could be applied to create restraining techniques that neutralized enemy mobility while maintaining offensive potential that could achieve elimination through methods that conventional swordsmanship training had never addressed or recognized as viable approaches to Demon Slayer operations. The constricting motion that characterized this form's execution reflected understanding that some tactical situations required approaches that prioritized control over immediate destruction when circumstances favored gradual application of pressure over dramatic gestures that might alert enemies to danger before decisive action could be completed. The suffocation philosophy that guided Coil Choke applications recognized that demons whose regeneration capabilities made conventional damage ineffective might still be vulnerable to techniques that prevented respiratory function or circulatory activity through mechanical interference rather than tissue destruction that could be healed through supernatural processes. The patient application that this form required demonstrated how serpent breathing honored natural predator behavior that achieved results through persistence rather than explosive action when tactical conditions favored sustained pressure over immediate resolution. The fourth form, Twin-Headed Reptile, embodied deception through technique that created false targeting information while concealing true attack vector until commitment to specific defensive response made enemy vulnerable to strikes that conventional preparation could not address adequately. The dual threat nature that characterized this form's execution reflected understanding that psychological warfare could prove as effective as physical capability when proper misdirection enabled attacks that bypassed defensive advantages through confusion rather than overwhelming them, through superior force that might not be available to practitioners whose strengths lay in other areas. The reptilian imagery that accompanied twin-headed technique visualization connected serpent breathing philosophy to understanding that some creatures achieved evolutionary success through characteristics that seemed disadvantageous, until specific circumstances revealed their true value as survival mechanisms. The psychological complexity that this form required demonstrated how effective deception demanded complete understanding of enemy expectations and behavioral patterns while maintaining personal clarity about actual intentions that guided tactical decision-making. Despite apparent contradiction, between visible actions and hidden objectives. The fifth form, Slithering Serpent, represented ultimate expression of serpent breathing philosophy through technique that integrated all previous forms into flowing sequence that could adapt to any tactical situation while maintaining unpredictability that made defensive preparation impossible for enemies whose experience with conventional demon slayers had not prepared them for approaches that operated according to serpentine rather than human logic. The continuous motion that characterized this form's execution demonstrated how proper breathing technique could sustain complex movement patterns that exceeded normal human coordination capabilities when systematic training developed unconscious competence that eliminated conscious interference with optimal performance. Obanai's personal characteristics perfectly complemented serpent breathing requirements, his slight build and extraordinary flexibility, providing foundation for techniques that relied on evasion and precision rather than direct confrontation, while his psychological development through traumatic experiences created mental framework that understood how apparent weakness could be transformed into tactical advantage when properly applied through methods that honored individual circumstances rather than forcing conformity to standardized approaches that might suppress natural gifts. The bandages that concealed Obanai's facial scars served practical purposes that extended beyond simple cosmetic consideration to encompass psychological warfare that created uncertainty about his emotional state and tactical intentions while providing protection for sensitive tissue that might become liability during combat if exposed to environmental hazards or direct enemy attacks. The mystery that his concealed appearance created provided additional tactical advantage through enemy uncertainty about his capabilities and behavioral patterns that conventional assessment methods could not adequately analyze. Kaburamaru, the white snake that accompanied Obanai during Demon Slayer operations, represented unique partnership between human and animal that supplemented individual capabilities through enhanced sensory awareness and tactical intelligence that conventional equipment could not provide, while demonstrating how serpent breathing philosophy extended beyond simple technique adoption to encompass complete lifestyle integration that honored natural wisdom over human assumptions about appropriate combat approaches. The symbiotic relationship that characterized their cooperation created tactical advantages that exceeded what either participant could achieve independently through methods that challenged conventional understanding of Demon Slayer operational parameters. The sensory enhancement that Kaburamaru provided through superior detection capabilities enabled early warning systems that could identify threats before human senses could recognize danger, while providing tactical intelligence about enemy positions and behavioral patterns that inform strategic decision-making during complex operations where environmental awareness determines success or failure. The communication system that developed between human and serpent created coordination that approached telepathic efficiency while maintaining individual autonomy that prevented either participant from becoming dependent on the other beyond reasonable operational requirements. The psychological impact that Obanai's serpent companion created during demon encounters provided additional tactical advantage through fear and confusion that disrupted enemy concentration while creating opportunities for attacks that might not have been available without distraction effects that conventional approaches could not replicate. The visual spectacle that human-serpent cooperation generated served practical combat purposes while honoring serpent breathing philosophy that recognized how psychological warfare could achieve results that physical capability alone might not produce despite superior technique or equipment. Advantages. The integration between Obanai's breathing technique and Kaburamaru's natural capabilities demonstrated how serpent breathing philosophy encouraged partnerships that transcended normal human limitations through cooperation with entities whose characteristics complemented rather than duplicated individual strengths, while maintaining essential human agency that prevented subordination of demon slayer objectives to animal instincts that might compromise mission effectiveness. The balance that characterized their relationship reflected understanding that effective cooperation required mutual respect rather than dominance by either participant, despite obvious differences in intelligence and tactical responsibility. The final battle against Muzan that tested serpent breathing against ultimate demonic power provided validation of unconventional approach to demon slayer operations, while illustrating how individual innovation could contribute to collective effort that exceeded what standardized techniques might achieve despite their proven effectiveness against lesser threats. The coordination that Obanai demonstrated with other Hashira during this encounter proved that serpent breathing philosophy could enhance rather than compromise team operations when properly integrated into coordinated strategies that honored individual specialization while serving shared objectives that transcended personal preference or tactical comfort zones. Moon breathing stands as testament to how noble intentions could be corrupted through centuries of demonic influence. Its 16 forms representing tragic evolution from original attempt to master sun breathing into something that perverted sacred techniques through supernatural enhancement that transformed protective power into instrument of destruction and domination. Kokushibo's mastery of this forbidden art demonstrated how immortality could enable continuous refinement of combat techniques beyond human limitations, while illustrating terrible cost of abandoning mortality for power that came at price of essential humanity that gave meaning to martial excellence. The origins of moon breathing traced back to Michikatsu Tsugikuni's desperate attempts to equal his twin brother Yoriichi's supernatural mastery of sun breathing. His inability to achieve such perfection, despite years of dedicated training, creating psychological wound that festered through decades of comparison with sibling, whose abilities seemed to transcend human limitations through effortless grace that made impossible achievements appear natural. The jealousy that consumed Michikatsu's heart transformed brotherly admiration into bitter resentment that prepared ground for choices that would damn him to eternal existence. As creature whose power came through abandoning everything noble about original motivation, the breathing style that emerged from Michikatsu's individual limitations represented adaptation that Yoriichi had created specifically to accommodate his brother's strengths while compensating for inability to master sun breathing's perfect forms. The personalized techniques, reflecting understanding that individual differences required specialized approaches to achieve optimal effectiveness, rather than forcing conformity to standards that might prove impossible despite sincere dedication and systematic training. The moon-based imagery that characterized these techniques provided alternative celestial model that honored night sky's beauty while acknowledging that reflected light could never match solar radiance that served as ultimate standard for breathing technique excellence. The transformation into demon that gave Michikatsu immortal existence as Kokushibo enabled continuation of breathing technique development through centuries of refinement that no human practitioner could survive to complete. His supernatural physiology, providing foundation for innovations that pushed moon breathing beyond original limitations toward complexity that exceeded any other known breathing style through accumulated experience that human lifespan could never accommodate. The Blood Demon art integration that characterized his enhanced techniques created tangible crescent moon projections that operated according to supernatural principles while maintaining connection to breathing style foundation that distinguished his abilities from purely demonic powers. The 16 forms that comprised complete moon breathing curriculum represented unparalleled complexity in breathing technique development, their number exceeding all other known styles through systematic expansion that added new applications as tactical situations demanded innovation beyond original framework, while maintaining essential characteristics that connected each form to moon-based philosophy that guided overall approach to combat and spiritual development. The geometric precision that characterized these techniques reflected mathematical understanding that approached supernatural insight while maintaining practical effectiveness that proved their value through centuries of successful application against enemies whose power required responses that conventional techniques could not provide. The first form, Dark Moon Evening Palace, established foundation principles through technique that created multiple, simultaneous cutting arcs that confused enemy perception while delivering devastating attacks from angles that conventional swordsmanship could not achieve without sacrificing defensive positioning or offensive momentum. The palace imagery that accompanied this form's visualization reflected understanding that proper technique execution created architectural structures of violence that provided both offensive capability and defensive coverage through geometric arrangements that honored celestial patterns while serving practical combat purposes. The crescent moon projections that emerged from proper execution of this foundational technique demonstrated how Blood Demon art enhancement could multiply individual blade strikes into comprehensive assault patterns that exceeded what physical weapon alone could produce, while maintaining precision that ensured each projected blade served specific tactical purpose rather than creating impressive display without corresponding effectiveness. The dark moon aspect that characterized this form's spiritual foundation reflected understanding that night brought different opportunities and challenges that required adaptation of solar principles to lunar conditions that honored alternative approaches to power and illumination. The second form, Pearl Flower Moongazing, embodied aesthetic appreciation that remained possible even within context of demonic existence, its flowing movements creating visual poetry that concealed lethal efficiency, while demonstrating how beauty and destruction could coexist when proper technique integrated artistic vision with tactical necessity. The pearl imagery that characterized this form's execution reflected understanding that precious things could emerge from patient cultivation, even within environments that seemed hostile to refinement and spiritual development that transcended mere survival or dominance considerations. The moon-gazing philosophy that guided this technique's application demonstrated how contemplative approach could enhance combat effectiveness through psychological preparation that achieved clarity and focus despite external pressures that might compromise performance for practitioners whose mental discipline had not been developed through systematic meditation and spiritual practice. The flower element that supplemented lunar imagery provided connection to growth and natural beauty that preserved essential appreciation for life's positive aspects, despite necessity of taking life for protective purposes or personal advancement. The third form, Loathsome Moonchains, represented darker aspect of moon-breathing philosophy through technique that embodied psychological warfare as much as physical combat, its name reflecting understanding that some battles required approaches that inspired fear and revulsion rather than admiration or respect. When tactical conditions demanded disruption of enemy morale and confidence rather than straightforward demonstration of superior skill or power. The chain imagery that characterized this form's execution created binding effects that restricted enemy movement while maintaining offensive potential that could achieve elimination through methods that conventional freedom of movement could not adequately counter. The loathsome aspect that distinguished this technique from more honorable combat applications reflected moral corruption that centuries of demonic existence had inflicted upon originally noble motivation. The gradual transformation of protective instincts into predatory behavior that maintained technical excellence while abandoning spiritual foundation that had given meaning to martial achievement. The psychological impact that loathsome moon chains created provided tactical advantage through enemy demoralization that compromised defensive effectiveness while creating opportunities for decisive action during moments of hesitation or doubt. The 10th form, drilling slashes moon through bamboo leaves, demonstrated how moon breathing could address defensive obstacles through technique that penetrated any barrier while maintaining precision that ensured effectiveness despite resistance that might deflect conventional attacks through superior positioning or reinforcement that standard approaches could not overcome. The drilling aspect that characterized this form's execution reflected understanding that persistence and proper technique could overcome any obstacle when systematic application maintained pressure that exceeded defensive capability to absorb or redirect destructive force. The bamboo imagery that accompanied this technique's visualization provided natural metaphor for flexibility that could bend without breaking while maintaining structural integrity that enabled recovery from temporary displacement or deformation that might compromise less resilient materials under similar stress conditions. The leaf element that supplemented bamboo symbolism reflected understanding that apparent fragility could conceal surprising strength when proper support systems enabled survival, despite environmental pressures that seemed overwhelming to observers whose analysis remained limited to surface appearances. The 14th form, catastrophe-type Tenman crescent moon, represented near ultimate expression of moon-breathing power through technique that created area-wide destruction that exceeded what individual combat applications could achieve, while demonstrating how breathing style mastery could influence battlefield conditions on strategic rather than merely tactical level. The catastrophic scale that characterized this form's effects reflected centuries of development that had pushed technique boundaries beyond original conception toward applications that threatened entire regions rather than individual opponents whose elimination remained primary objective of conventionnel Demon Slayer operation. The Tenman element that distinguished this technique from lesser applications referred to mythological associations with divine punishment and supernatural authority that transcended human jurisdiction while maintaining connection to celestial imagery that honored moon breathing's astronomical foundation. The crescent moon emphasis that culminated this form's execution demonstrated how accumulated power could be focused into geometric patterns that maximize destructive potential while maintaining aesthetic beauty that preserved artistic vision despite devastating practical effects that such techniques produced when properly executed by practitioners whose mastery had reached supernatural levels. The 16th form, Moonbow Half Moon, represented ultimate evolution of moon-breathing philosophy through technique that integrated all previous forms into comprehensive expression of complete mastery that could address any tactical situation while maintaining unpredictability, that made defensive preparation impossible for enemies, whose experience had not prepared them for approaches that operated according to principles that transcended normal understanding of combat technique limitations. The moonbow imagery that characterized this culminating technique reflected understanding that lunar light could create atmospheric phenomena that rivaled solar displays when conditions enabled proper manifestation of hidden potential that remained invisible under normal circumstances. The integration between moon breathing and Kokushibo's blood demon art created synergistic effects that exceeded what either component could achieve independently, while demonstrating how supernatural enhancement could amplify inherited techniques without completely replacing their essential characteristics that connected enhanced abilities to human foundation that provided meaning and context for power that might otherwise become purely destructive force without moral or aesthetic guidance that elevated violence beyond mere brutality. The crescent blade projections that accompanied advanced moon-breathing applications operated according to supernatural principles that enabled them to exist independently of physical weapon, while maintaining cutting power that could slice through any material defense when properly directed through technique that honored geometric relationships between lunar phases and optimal striking angles. The tangible nature that characterized these projected weapons distinguished moon breathing from purely visual effects that created psychological impact without corresponding physical danger, their substantial reality providing tactical capabilities that conventional swordsmanship could not replicate regardless of individual skill or equipment quality. The psychological corruption that centuries of demonic existence had inflicted upon Kokushibo's personality demonstrated how immortality could preserve technical knowledge while gradually eroding spiritual foundation that had originally motivated breathing technique development. His transformation from protective warrior into predatory monster, illustrating dangers inherent in pursuing power for its own sake, rather than maintaining connection to moral purposes that gave meaning to martial excellence. The jealousy that had driven his original choices continued to influence his behavior, despite centuries of experience that should have provided wisdom about futility of comparing individual achievements to standards that transcended normal human capability. The final confrontation that tested moon breathing against combined efforts of multiple Hashira provided ultimate demonstration of how individual excellence could prove insufficient when faced with coordinated opposition that transcended personal limitations through cooperative effort that honored shared principles over individual achievement. The defeat that eventually claimed Kokushibo despite his supernatural power and centuries of technique refinement illustrated how moral foundation ultimately determined outcome when technical capability remained relatively equal between opposing forces whose dedication to their respective causes provided motivation that sustained effort despite overwhelming odds. The legacy that moon breathing would leave behind through its influence on Demon Slayer understanding reflected complex lesson about how power without moral guidance could achieve impressive results while ultimately failing to provide satisfaction or meaning that made centuries of existence worthwhile. The tragedy of wasted potential, serving as warning about choices that prioritized personal advancement over service to others, whose welfare provided foundation for achievements that transcended individual mortality through positive influence that honored memory of those who had sacrificed themselves for greater good. The philosophy of breath that underlies all Demon Slayer techniques transcends mere combat application to encompass complete understanding of how conscious control over autonomic processes could unlock human potential that remained dormant, until systematic training revealed pathways to capabilities that exceeded normal physiological limitations through disciplined practice that connected individual will to universal forces governing life itself. Total concentration breathing represented foundation upon which all advanced techniques rested, its mastery requiring fundamental revision of relationship between conscious mind and involuntary bodily functions that most people never considered capable of deliberate direction or enhancement through methods that honored ancient wisdom about breath as bridge between physical and spiritual dimensions of human existence. The constant application of enhanced breathing patterns that distinguished demon slayers from ordinary warriors demanded mental discipline that transformed unconscious biological processes into consciously directed systems whose optimization could multiply strength, speed, endurance, and sensory awareness beyond levels that conventional conditioning could achieve, regardless of dedication or natural gifts that individuals might possess. The requirement that such breathing continue during sleep represented ultimate integration of technique with identity. Practitioners achieving state where enhanced function became new baseline rather than temporary augmentation that required conscious effort to maintain during periods of stress or distraction that might compromise performance when effectiveness determined survival outcomes. The spiritual dimensions of breathing technique mastery extended beyond physical enhancement towards psychological and emotional development that enabled practitioners to maintain clear judgment and moral foundation despite exposure to horrors that could shatter unprepared minds while requiring actions that challenged normal ethical frameworks through necessity of taking life for protection of innocent people whose safety depended on demon slayers' willingness to bear psychological burden of necessary violence. The meditation aspects that accompanied proper breathing development created internal stability that could sustain warriors through experiences that would traumatize individuals whose mental preparation had not addressed relationship between breath control and emotional regulation. The philosophical framework that guided breathing technique development recognized breath as fundamental connection between individual consciousness and universal life force that sustained all existence while providing pathway for accessing abilities that transcended normal human limitations when proper understanding enabled harmony between personal will and cosmic principles that governed reality itself. The rhythmic patterns that characterized advanced breathing applications created resonance with natural forces whose power could be channeled through human vessels, whose preparation had developed sufficient purity and dedication to serve as conduits for energies that exceeded individual generation capabilities. The relationship between breathing techniques and their practitioners' personalities reflected deep truth about how authentic mastery required integration between technical capability and essential character traits that determined how Teng power would be applied when circumstances demanded choices between personal safety and protective duty that defined demon slayer service. Water breathing attracted individuals whose nature emphasized adaptability and flowing response to changing conditions, while flame breathing drew those whose passionate dedication and unwavering spirit could sustain them through challenges that might overwhelm practitioners whose emotional foundation lacked necessary intensity and commitment to protective objectives. The thunder-breathing affinity that characterized certain practitioners reflected personality traits that favored explosive action and decisive intervention rather than gradual development or patient accumulation of advantage through sustained effort. Their techniques embodying understanding that some tactical situations required immediate resolution through overwhelming force applied with perfect timing, rather than complex strategies that might provide greater long-term effectiveness, but failed to address urgent circumstances where delay could prove fatal for those depending on Demon Slayer protection. The lightning-fast responses that thunder breathing enabled required mental frameworks that could process information and commit to action without hesitation, despite incomplete knowledge about enemy capabilities or environmental factors. The wind-breathing philosophy attracted individuals whose aggressive nature and willingness to sacrifice personal safety for mission objectives created tactical approaches that prioritized overwhelming offensive capability over defensive consideration while accepting risks that more cautious practitioners might consider unacceptable, despite advantages that such commitment could create against enemies whose supernatural abilities required responses that exceeded conventional wisdom about appropriate balance between offense and defense. The scarred bodies that characterized wind-breathing masters provided visible testament to philosophy that viewed personal injury as acceptable cost for achieving protective objectives that served greater good rather than individual welfare. The stone-breathing affinity reflected personality traits that emphasized unwavering determination and spiritual strength rather than physical prowess or technical innovation. Practitioners whose massive frames and unconventional weapons created combat approaches that integrated prayer with violence in ways that sanctified necessary destruction while maintaining essential compassion for all living beings, including enemies whose evil nature required elimination for protection of innocent people, whose safety provided moral justification for actions that might otherwise compromise practitioners' spiritual development through repeated exposure to killing that served protective rather than predatory purposes. The mist-breathing attraction drew individuals whose subtle nature and preference for indirect approaches enabled tactical solutions that achieved decisive results through confusion and misdirection, rather than overwhelming force or aggressive confrontation. Their techniques, embodying understanding that victory could be attained through superior strategy and psychological warfare, rather than raw power applications that might prove inadequate against enemies whose supernatural capabilities exceeded human limitations, unless countered through methods that honored intelligence over strength while maintaining lethal effectiveness that justified unconventional approaches to demon elimination. The love-breathing development reflected unique personality characteristics that enabled transformation of emotional vulnerability into combat strength through techniques that channeled protective instincts toward enhanced physical capability while maintaining essential gentleness that distinguished defensive action from aggressive dominance. Practitioners whose unusual physiology provided foundation for abilities that exceeded normal human potential through proper integration of caring feelings with systematic training that honored emotional authenticity as source of power, rather than weakness to overcome through conventional warrior conditioning. The flower-breathing philosophy attracted individuals whose aesthetic appreciation and graceful nature could be integrated with lethal precision through techniques that maintained beauty while serving protective purposes. Their approach to combat, demonstrating how artistic vision could enhance rather than compromise tactical effectiveness when proper understanding enabled integration of visual harmony with practical requirements that achieved elimination, objectives without abandoning appreciation for grace and elegance that elevated necessary violence beyond mere brutality through conscious attention to how power was expressed during critical moments. The insect-breathing innovation reflected scientific thinking and analytical approach to problem-solving that could transform apparent physical limitations into tactical advantages through creative applications of medical knowledge and chemical understanding that provided alternatives to conventional strength-based methods while maintaining deadly effectiveness against supernatural opponents whose capabilities required innovative responses that honored intellectual capability over traditional warrior archetypes. The poison-based techniques that characterized this style demonstrated how individual circumstances could inspire breathing technique development that expanded organizational capabilities beyond established parameters. The beast breathing emergence illustrated how wilderness, survival, experience, and animal behavior understanding could create combat approaches that transcended formal training limitations through intuitive knowledge gained from direct confrontation with natural predators whose capabilities had been refined through evolutionary pressures that human civilization had eliminated through technological advancement that might have dulled essential survival instincts. The self-taught nature of these techniques proved that breathing style mastery could emerge from proper understanding of fundamental principles, even without institutional guidance, when individual dedication and natural gifts provided sufficient foundation for systematic development. The serpent breathing philosophy reflected psychological adaptation to traumatic experiences through techniques that transformed victimization into empowerment, while maintaining tactical effectiveness that achieved protective objectives, despite unconventional approaches that honored individual circumstances rather than forcing conformity to standardized methods that might suppress natural gifts or fail to address personal limitations that required specialized attention. The deceptive movements that characterized this style demonstrated how apparent weakness could be transformed into tactical advantage when proper technique enabled creative solutions to combat challenges. The mental discipline that breathing technique mastery required created psychological framework that could sustain practitioners through experiences that would shatter unprepared minds while maintaining clarity of judgment that enabled appropriate responses to moral dilemmas that arose when protective duty required actions that challenged normal ethical considerations through necessity of taking life for prevention of greater evil. The meditation practices that accompanied breathing development provided tools for processing traumatic experiences without losing essential humanity that distinguished Demon Slayer service from mere violence, while maintaining effectiveness that justified personal costs associated with dedicating one's life to protecting others. The breath control that formed foundation of all advanced techniques created conscious awareness of internal processes that most people never considered, while providing access to reserves of strength and endurance that exceeded normal human capabilities when proper application enabled optimization of physiological systems through disciplined practice that connected individual will to biological functions, whose enhancement multiplied overall effectiveness beyond what conventional conditioning could achieve, regardless of dedication or natural advantages that practitioners might possess through genetic inheritance or favorable circumstances. The rhythm patterns that characterize different breathing styles reflected understanding of how temporal relationships between inhalation, retention, and exhalation could be modified to produce specific physiological and psychological effects that served tactical purposes, while maintaining spiritual foundation that prevented corruption through repeated exposure to violence that served protective rather than predatory objectives. The mathematical precision that governed optimal breathing applications demonstrated how systematic approach to technique development could achieve reproducible results that enabled reliable enhancement of human capability through methods that honored ancient wisdom while adapting to contemporary challenges. The visualization techniques that accompanied advanced breathing practice created mental frameworks that enabled practitioners to access enhanced capabilities through imagery that connected conscious intention to unconscious processes, while providing psychological anchors that maintained focus, during stressful encounters where distraction could prove fatal, when split-second decisions determined outcomes of confrontations with supernatural opponents whose abilities exceeded human limitations unless properly countered through techniques that transcended normal understanding of what individual dedication and systematic training could accomplish. The breathing styles that emerged through generations of refinement and adaptation demonstrated humanity's infinite capacity for innovation when faced with challenges that exceeded conventional solutions, while maintaining essential characteristics that honored ancestral wisdom about relationship between breath and life force that sustained all existence. The individual variations that characterized different practitioners' approaches to inherited techniques illustrated how authentic mastery required integration of traditional knowledge with personal insight that enabled creative applications without compromising fundamental principles that made breathing techniques effective against supernatural opponents whose power required responses that transcended normal human limitations through proper understanding of how conscious will could direct biological processes toward enhanced performance that served protective objectives rather than personal aggrandizement. The sacred relationship between master and student that defined breathing technique transmission represented one of humanity's most profound educational traditions, creating bonds that transcended mere instruction to encompass spiritual mentorship that shaped character while developing capabilities that could mean difference between life and death when supernatural threats demanded responses that exceeded what individual talent alone could provide without proper guidance from those whose experience had proven techniques through countless encounters with demons whose power challenged every assumption about human limitations. The former Hashira, who dedicated their remaining years to training successors, understood that knowledge without wisdom remained incomplete, while technique without moral foundation could corrupt practitioners whose power might be turned toward destructive purposes if proper guidance failed to instill values that honored protective service over personal advancement. Sakonji Urokodaki's approach to water-breathing instruction embodied understanding that each student required individualized attention that acknowledged personal characteristics as foundations for specialized development, rather than obstacles to overcome through standardized methods that might suppress natural gifts while failing to achieve optimal effectiveness against supernatural opponents, whose capabilities required creative adaptation of inherited techniques to circumstances that formal training could never fully anticipate. The mountain sanctuary where his education occurred provided an environment where intensive conditioning could be combined with spiritual development that created warriors whose technical mastery served moral purposes, that gave meaning to the seized abilities whose power could prove overwhelming for practitioners whose character foundation had not been adequately prepared. The Tengu mask that concealed Sakonji's features served multiple purposes beyond simple anonymity, creating psychological distance that enabled harsh training methods while invoking traditional associations with supernatural wisdom that helped establish authority necessary for demanding students push beyond comfortable limitations toward excellence that required systematic dismantling of assumptions about what human dedication could achieve through proper guidance and unlimited commitment to protective objectives that transcended personal welfare. The carved features that combined benevolent and stern aspects reflected understanding that effective teaching required balance between encouragement and discipline, while maintaining standards that ensured graduates possessed capabilities sufficient for survival against enemies whose power demanded nothing less than perfection in technique application. The comprehensive curriculum that water-breathing education encompassed addressed not only physical conditioning and technical instruction, but psychological preparation that enabled students to maintain effectiveness despite exposure to horrors that could shatter unprepared minds, while requiring decisions that challenged normal moral frameworks through necessity of taking life for protection of innocent people, whose safety provided justification for actions that might otherwise compromise essential humanity that distinguished Demon Slayer service from mere violence. The meditation practices that supplemented combat training created mental stability that could sustain practitioners through experiences that would traumatize individuals whose preparation had not addressed relationship between emotional regulation and tactical effectiveness. The mountain climbing that formed foundation of Sakonji's conditioning program served purposes beyond simple physical development to encompass lessons about persistence and mental toughness that would prove essential when facing enemies whose supernatural capabilities made conventional approaches inadequate for achieving decisive results within acceptable timeframes, while protecting civilian populations whose welfare remained primary consideration despite tactical advantages that more aggressive methods might provide. The repetitive nature of these exercises built muscle memory, while creating psychological framework that could maintain focus despite fatigue or stress that might compromise performance during critical moments when hesitation could prove fatal. The water-breathing forms that students mastered through systematic progression each addressed specific tactical situations while teaching broader principles about adaptation and flowing response to changing conditions that characterized effective combat against opponents whose abilities exceeded human limitations, unless properly countered through techniques that honored flexibility over rigid adherence to predetermined patterns that might prove inadequate when circumstances required creative solutions to unprecedented challenges. The philosophical foundation that accompanied technical instruction created understanding that combat techniques served protective purposes rather than personal glory, while maintaining deadly effectiveness that justified years of combat techniques. Preparation through results that protected innocent people from supernatural predation. Jigoro Kuwajima's thunder-breathing instruction reflected different educational philosophy that acknowledged student limitations while focusing development on areas where individual strengths could be maximized rather than attempting comprehensive mastery that might prove impossible for practitioners whose natural gifts lay in specialized rather than general excellence. His approach to Zenitsu's training, demonstrating how effective teaching adapted methods to student characteristics rather than forcing conformity to idealized standards that might suppress rather than enhance authentic potential. The patience that characterized his work with difficult students illustrated understanding that true mastery sometimes emerged through unconventional pathways that honored individual differences while maintaining essential effectiveness. The relationship between Zenitsu and Kaigaku that developed through shared training under Jigoro's guidance demonstrated how different personalities could respond to identical instruction through divergent character development that influenced how inherited techniques would be applied when circumstances demanded choices between self-interest and protective duty that defined Demon Slayer service. The tragedy that eventually claimed their teacher's life through seppuku reflected responsibility that masters accepted for students whose choices brought dishonor to inherited traditions, while illustrating emotional costs associated with dedicating one's life to education of young people whose futures remained uncertain despite quality of preparation provided. Kyojiro Rengoku's inheritance of flame-breathing traditions through family lineage created different dynamic between teacher and student, when instruction occurred within context of blood relationships that provided emotional foundation while creating expectations that could prove either motivational or overwhelming, depending on individual capacity for meeting standards that previous generations had established, through achievements that seemed to transcend normal human capabilities. The enthusiastic personality that characterized Kyojiro's approach to both learning and teaching demonstrated how positive attitude could enhance, rather than compromise, technical development when proper understanding connected individual excellence to service of others whose protection provided meaning that elevated martial achievement beyond personal satisfaction. The philosophical discussions that accompanied Rengoku family training addressed moral dimensions of Demon Slayer service, while providing intellectual framework that could sustain practitioners through experiences that challenged faith in human goodness when repeated exposure to supernatural evil might corrupt individuals whose character foundation had not been adequately prepared for psychological pressures that accompanied necessary violence. The emphasis on maintaining strong heart, regardless of external circumstances, created mental resilience that could preserve essential humanity while enabling actions that served protective purposes, despite personal costs that such service invariably imposed on those who dedicated their lives to standing between innocent people and supernatural threats. The written records that preserved flame-breathing techniques for future generations illustrated systematic approach to knowledge transmission that ensured continuity despite individual mortality, while providing detailed instruction that could supplement direct teaching when circumstances prevented, adequate personal guidance for students whose development required information that experience alone might not provide. The careful documentation of not only technical details but philosophical principles demonstrated understanding that complete education required integration of practical capability with moral foundation that prevented corruption through power, while maintaining effectiveness that justified years of preparation. Gyomei Himejima's stone-breathing instruction combined religious devotion with martial training in ways that created educational environment where spiritual development enhanced rather than conflicted with combat capability, while providing moral framework that justified necessary violence through service to divine will that honored all life, while accepting reality that protection of innocent sometimes required elimination of those whose nature threatened communal welfare. The prayer-based approach that characterized his teaching methods demonstrated how meditation and physical conditioning could be integrated to produce warriors whose strength derived from spiritual source rather than mere muscular development. The unconventional weapons that stone breathing utilized required specialized instruction that could not be provided through standard Demon Slayer training programs, while demanding physical capabilities that exceeded normal human pain, limitations through systematic conditioning that pushed bodily systems beyond typically sustainable performance levels when proper technique enabled optimization of individual potential. The integration of spiked flail and axe combinations that connected through chain links created weapon systems whose effective application required years of dedicated practice, while providing capabilities that conventional swords could not replicate, regardless of superior metallurgy or traditional craftsmanship. The tears that frequently accompanied Gyomei's instruction reflected emotional engagement with students whose welfare provided motivation that transcended professional obligation, while demonstrating how genuine warriors could maintain sensitivity despite engaging in activities that required psychological hardness sufficient for taking life when protective necessity demanded such action. The combination of compassionate nature with devastating combat capability illustrated how proper spiritual development could prevent brutalization through repeated exposure to violence, while maintaining effectiveness that served essential protective purposes. The group dynamics that emerged when multiple students trained simultaneously under individual masters created competitive environment that could enhance motivation while building relationships that would prove essential during future operations where mutual dependence determined survival outcomes. When facing enemies whose power exceeded what individual excellence could overcome, regardless of personal achievement levels, the bonds forged through shared hardship and common dedication to protective objectives provided psychological foundation that sustained demon slayers through experiences that would isolate individuals whose preparation had not addressed importance of human connection for maintaining sanity during prolonged exposure to supernatural warfare. The graduation ceremonies that marked completion of foundational training represented formal recognition of achievement, while acknowledging that true mastery would emerge only through practical application of inherited knowledge against real threats whose capabilities could not be fully simulated through training exercises regardless of their intensity or systematic design. The emotional significance that characterized these transitions reflected understanding that sending students into danger required acceptance of responsibility for outcomes that might include death or injury, despite quality of preparation provided through years of dedicated instruction. The ongoing relationship that continued between master and student after formal training completion demonstrated how educational bonds transcended institutional requirements to encompass lifelong commitment to mutual support and shared dedication to protective objectives that connected individual achievement to collective mission that served humanity's welfare against supernatural threats, whose power required coordinated response from multiple generations of demon slayers, whose knowledge built upon ancestral wisdom while adapting to contemporary challenges. The correspondence that maintained connection despite geographical separation provided emotional support while enabling continued learning through experience. Sharing that enhanced both parties' understanding of how inherited techniques could be improved through practical application. The legacy that master-student relationships created through successful transmission of breathing techniques ensured continuity of knowledge while inspiring innovation that honored traditional foundations while addressing new challenges that required creative adaptation of inherited wisdom to circumstances that previous generations could not have anticipated despite their accumulated experience and systematic preparation. The emotional investment that characterized these relationships provided motivation for excellence that transcended mere professional competence while creating human connections that gave meaning to sacrifice and dedication that demon slayer service required from those who chose to dedicate their lives to protecting others from supernatural evil, whose power challenged every assumption about human limitations and potential for heroic action. The evolution of breathing techniques through practical application and individual innovation represents humanity's endless capacity for adaptation when faced with challenges that exceeded original training parameters, while honoring fundamental principles that made inherited methods effective against supernatural opponents whose capabilities required creative responses that transcended established doctrine without compromising essential effectiveness that justified years of systematic preparation. The dynamic nature of Demon Slayer combat created laboratory conditions where theoretical knowledge met practical reality through encounters that tested every assumption about technique limitations while providing opportunities for breakthrough discoveries that could enhance organizational capabilities through insights that emerged from life or death situations where conventional approaches proved inadequate for achieving protective objectives. The personal innovations that individual demon slayers developed during their careers reflected understanding that authentic mastery enabled creative adaptation when circumstances demanded responses that formal training could not have anticipated. Despite comprehensive preparation that addressed known tactical situations and established enemy behavior patterns, Giyu Tomioka's creation of the 11th form, Dead Calm, demonstrated how complete understanding of water-breathing principles could generate new techniques that surpassed original curriculum through integration of advanced concepts that emerged from years of practical experience, combined with intuitive grasp of underlying philosophy that governed all effective applications of inherited knowledge. The Dead Calm technique that Giyu developed represented revolutionary breakthrough in defensive methodology through approach that achieved perfect stillness while maintaining readiness for instantaneous counterattack when optimal opportunities presented themselves during combat engagement with enemies whose aggressive tactics created openings that conventional defensive postures might not be positioned to exploit effectively. The absolute tranquility that characterized this form's execution required psychological preparation that transcended normal training methods while demonstrating how individual insight could identify possibilities within established traditions that previous practitioners had not recognized, despite their own considerable expertise and accumulated experience. The tactical principles that guided Dead Calm applications reflected understanding that sometimes inaction could prove more effective than aggressive response, when proper timing and positioning created conditions where enemy attacks would expose vulnerabilities that could be exploited through perfectly placed counterstrikes whose effectiveness exceeded what preemptive assault might achieve, despite apparent advantages of maintaining initiative throughout combat encounters. The water-like stillness that preceded explosive action embodied fundamental water-breathing philosophy, while extending its application beyond previously recognized limitations through innovation that honored tradition, while transcending its apparent constraints. Muichiro Tokito's development of the 7th form, Obscuring Clouds, during his confrontation with Gyoko illustrated how extraordinary circumstances could trigger breakthrough insights that enabled creation of new techniques when existing methods proved inadequate for addressing unique challenges that required immediate solutions, despite lack of time for systematic development or testing that normally accompanied breathing technique innovation. The mist breathing principles that provided foundation for this improvised form demonstrated how deep understanding could generate creative applications under pressure when complete mastery enabled practitioners to identify previously unexplored possibilities within inherited frameworks. The Obscuring Clouds technique represented ultimate expression of mist breathing concealment philosophy through approach that transformed entire combat environment into tactical advantage while maintaining offensive capability that could achieve decisive results despite visual conditions that would compromise less skilled practitioners whose preparation had not developed sufficient spatial awareness or alternative sensory capabilities. The environmental manipulation that characterized this form's execution required understanding of atmospheric conditions and air movement patterns that exceeded normal meteorological knowledge while providing practical applications that served immediate combat requirements. The improvisational nature that enabled Obscuring Clouds development demonstrated how breathing technique mastery could transcend formal instruction when practitioners achieved sufficient understanding of fundamental principles to generate new applications without compromising essential characteristics that made original methods effective against supernatural opponents whose capabilities exceeded human limitations, unless properly countered through techniques that honored ancestral wisdom while adapting to contemporary challenges. The success of this spontaneous innovation validated theoretical understanding while proving that breathing styles remained living traditions capable of continued growth rather than fixed systems whose development had reached completion. Zenitsu Agatsuma's creation of the seventh form, Flaming Thunder God, represented response to personal crisis that demanded capabilities beyond his mastered first form repertoire. When confrontation with Kaigaku required techniques that could match upper moon power, while honoring thunder-breathing traditions that provided foundation for his specialized development. The emotional motivation that drove this innovation demonstrated how individual circumstances could inspire breakthrough achievements when personal stakes created necessity that transcended normal training limitations while providing psychological energy that enabled access to capabilities that seemed beyond practitioners' apparent potential. The Flaming Thunder God technique combined speed elements that characterized Zenitsu's perfected first form applications with enhanced power and visual effects that created devastating attack capable of eliminating upper moon demons through single strike when properly executed under optimal conditions. The dragon-like manifestation that accompanied this form's execution reflected integration of thunder-breathing principles with individual creativity that honored inherited traditions while expressing personal understanding of how accumulated training could be focused into revolutionary applications that exceeded original technique parameters. The family legacy preservation that characterized flame-breathing development through Rengoku generations demonstrated how breathing techniques could evolve through systematic refinement when each practitioner contributed improvements that built upon ancestral achievements while maintaining essential characteristics that made inherited methods effective against increasingly powerful enemies whose capabilities required continuous adaptation of established approaches. The written documentation that preserved these innovations ensured knowledge transmission while providing foundation for future development that could address challenges not yet encountered by current generation of demon slayers. The ninth form, Purgatory, that represented pinnacle of Rengoku flame-breathing development, embodied ultimate commitment to protective objectives. Through technique that channeled practitioners' complete life force into single devastating attack whose power could overcome any opposition while requiring total dedication, that made personal survival secondary to achievement of elimination objectives. The dragon-like visualization that accompanied Purgatory execution demonstrated how spiritual energy could be transformed into tangible combat effectiveness when proper technique enabled manifestation of internal power through external expression that honored flame-breathing philosophy. The beast-breathing improvisations that Inosuke Hashibira generated during combat encounters illustrated how unconventional training backgrounds could produce innovation pathways that formal instruction might not recognize or develop, despite their potential effectiveness when properly applied, against enemies whose defensive preparations assumed more predictable attack patterns. The wilderness survival experience that provided foundation for his technique development created understanding of animal behavior and environmental awareness that could be translated into combat applications through creative thinking that honored natural wisdom over institutional doctrine. The spatial awareness capabilities that Inosuke developed through beast-breathing practice represented fusion of enhanced sensory perception with tactical intelligence that could identify enemy positions and weaknesses through environmental analysis that detected subtle air disturbances created by movement and presence. The mountain-wide detection range that this technique provided demonstrated how individual characteristics could be developed into supernatural capabilities when proper training methods acknowledged natural gifts as foundations for specialized advancement rather than curiosities to suppress in favor of standardized approaches. The poison-based innovations that Shinobu Kocho developed through insect-breathing applications represented complete reimagining of Demon Slayer combat methodology through techniques that replaced physical destruction with biochemical elimination while maintaining deadly effectiveness that justified revolutionary departure from traditional sword-based approaches. The wisteria toxin development that formed foundation of her combat effectiveness demonstrated how scientific knowledge could be integrated with breathing technique principles to create capabilities that addressed individual limitations, while providing tactical advantages that conventional methods could not replicate. The medical research that supplemented Shinobu's combat innovations created a comprehensive approach to demon elimination that addressed physiological vulnerabilities through chemical compounds whose effectiveness exceeded what mechanical damage could achieve against enemies whose regeneration capabilities made conventional injuries temporary inconveniences rather than decisive tactical factors. The systematic study of demon biology that guided her poison development represented integration of academic research with practical combat requirements that honored both scientific methodology and warrior traditions. The environmental adaptations that various breathing styles underwent when applied in different geographical and climatic conditions demonstrated flexibility that enabled continued effectiveness despite operational parameters that differed from original training environments where techniques had been developed and refined through systematic practice. The urban combat applications that required modification of techniques designed for wilderness or rural deployment illustrated how breathing styles could maintain essential characteristics while adapting to circumstances that challenged assumptions about optimal fighting conditions. The team coordination, innovations that emerged when multiple breathing style practitioners worked together during complex missions, created tactical possibilities that individual excellence could not achieve despite superior personal capability and advanced technique mastery. The complementary applications that different styles provided when properly coordinated demonstrated how organizational effectiveness could exceed some of individual contributions when strategic planning acknowledged unique strengths while compensating for inherent limitations that characterized specialized approaches to Demon Slayer operations. The technological integration possibilities that some practitioners explored represented potential future development directions that could enhance breathing technique effectiveness through equipment modifications or environmental manipulation that honored traditional principles while providing advantages that pure technique application might not achieve against enemies whose capabilities continued to evolve in response to Demon Slayer tactical innovations. The balance between preserving ancestral wisdom and embracing beneficial innovation remained an ongoing challenge that required careful evaluation of proposed changes against established effectiveness criteria. The philosophical evolution that accompanied breathing technique development reflected growing understanding of how individual mastery served collective objectives while maintaining personal identity and creative expression that distinguished authentic warriors from mere functionaries whose capabilities lacked spiritual foundation that gave meaning to technical achievement. The integration of combat effectiveness with moral development created a comprehensive approach to Demon Slayer service that honored both protective necessity and essential humanity, that distinguished heroes from those who simply possessed power without wisdom to apply it appropriately, And so we reach the end of our journey through the sacred arts of breathing that have sustained humanity's guardians through generations of supernatural warfare. Each technique representing unique expression of the endless human capacity to transform limitation into strength, fear into courage, and individual potential into collective protection. From the primordial perfection of sun breathing to the innovative adaptations that emerge through personal necessity, these techniques demonstrate how breath itself becomes bridge between mortal frailty and transcendent power, when guided by proper understanding and unwavering dedication to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The masters who developed these arts understood that true strength flows not from the sharpness of one's blade, but from the depth of one's commitment to preserving life and hope in a world where darkness seeks to consume all light. As you drift toward peaceful slumber, gentle warrior of dreams, let the rhythm of total concentration breathing guide your rest, while carrying within your heart the wisdom that every technique, every form, every innovation emerged from love rather than hatred, from protection rather than destruction. May your dreams be filled with flowing water and dancing flames, with thunder that clears the sky and mist that conceals beauty rather than malice. Rest now, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, dedicated souls continue their eternal vigil, their breath steady and strong, their hearts burning bright with the same compassion that transforms ordinary people into legends who live forever in the grateful memory of those they saved.